Varapura. On behalf of the Department of English, I extend a heartfelt welcome to each one of you who has joined us to celebrate scholarship, intellectual inquiry, and the enduring legacy of one of the great pioneers of Malayalam literary criticism, Professor M.P. Paul. Before we proceed further, let us take a moment to remember the towering figure in whose honor this lecture series is instituted. Professor M.P. Paul was one of the foremost architects of modern Malayalam literary criticism. Along with eminent critiques such as Kuttikrishna Marar and Joseph Mundasheri, he formed the celebrated critic trio that redefined Malayalam literary thought in the 20th century. He played a pioneering role in shifting literary criticism beyond poetry to include emerging forms such as the novel and short story. Through landmark works like Novel Sahityam and Saundarya Nirikshanam, he introduced a more scientific and comparative approach to literary analysis. Professor Paul was also a teacher of remarkable influence and served as professor and head of the Department of English here at St. Berchmans College. His passion for literature, intellectual freedom, and progressive thought continues to inspire generations. This lecture series is a tribute to a visionary scholar whose legacy continues to illuminate the path of many in Kerala. To begin today's program on a solemn and meaningful note, may I now invite Ashwin Thomas Joseph to lead us in prayer. I request you all to please rise.
സർവേശ്വരാ നിന്നെ ഭജിച്ചിടുന്നേൻ സത്യസ്വരൂപാ നമിച്ചിടുന്നേൻ ആനന്ദദായകാ മോദിക്കുന്നേൻ അദ്വൈതീയനേ ശക്തി ദർശിക്കുന്നേൻ സർവേശ്വരാ നിന്നെ ഭജിച്ചിടുന്നേ സത്യസ്വരൂപാ നമിച്ചിടുന്നേ നിർമ്മല സത്യമേ നിന്നെ തേടുന്നേ ജ്ഞാനസ്വരൂപാ നിൻ രൂപം കാണുന്നേ നിർമ്മല സത്യമേ നിന്നെ തേടുന്നേ ജ്ഞാനസ്വരൂപാ നിൻ രൂപം കാണുന്നേ ആദിന്ദനാം നിന്നെ നമിച്ചിടുന്നേ ആത്മസ്വരൂപനെ വണങ്ങിടുന്നേ ആദിന്ദനാം നിന്നെ നമിച്ചിടുന്നേ ആത്മസ്വരൂപനെ വണങ്ങിടുന്നേ സർവേശ്വരാ നിന്നെ ഭജിച്ചിടുന്നേ സത്യസ്വരൂപാ നമിച്ചിടുന്നേ സത്യസ്വരൂപാ നമിച്ചിടുന്നേ.
Thank you, Ashwin, for that soulful invocation. May the grace of God be in glory. Now, to formally welcome the gathering and introduce the spirit of this lecture series, I invite Father Jose Jacob, Vice Principal, St. Berchmans College, to deliver the welcome address.
A very warm good morning to one and all. Professor Sundar Sarukkai, the inaugural speaker of M.P. Paul Memorial Erudite Lecture Series. Dr. Nitin Varghese, head of the department. Loving family members of M.P. Paul sir. Invited guests, faculty members, and my dear students. Today, we have gathered here to remember and honor Venerable M.B. Paul sir. You may wonder why I am using the word venerable. Because one of our former principals, Father Joseph Vattakalam, Joseph sir told me this anecdote, remembering the relationship with SB, St. Berchmans and M.B. Paul sir. Now Vatakalamachan calls M.B. Paul sir Saint Paul. So allow me to use the word venerable. So Venerable M.B. Paul sir, a former teacher, head of the department, and first director of Shakespeare Theatre in SB. And as Manasa told you, is also one of the pioneers of modern literary criticism in Malayalam. He occupies a unique and respected place in the intellectual history as a teacher, critic, essayist, and a cultural mediator who helped to shape modern literary sensibility in Malayalam. He had a very short span, born in 1904. He died in 1952 at the age of 48. But like other literary legends like Keats and Shelley, within this short span, he made history. He was born in Puttanpalli in Kottayam district of Kerala. As his family members know, from an early age, he showed a deep interest in literature, philosophy, and languages. His education exposed him not only to Malayalam and Sanskrit traditions, but also to English and European literatures, which later became an important foundation for his critical writings. Paul sir spent a major part of his life as a teacher of English literature. He taught in several colleges, most importantly in our college, St. Berchmans College, in 2 innings. Then St. Thomas College, Thrissur, the first appointment. Then he came to SB. Then later in Mar Ivanios College, Trivandrum. The students of this generation may not understand the value of parallel colleges or tutorial colleges. We know. So let us salute the spirit of M.B. Paul sir, because he is the founder of parallel colleges in Kerala, which became the hope, the knot of rescue for generations, maybe until 1990s. I remember my brothers and sisters going to parallel college, because we had only a minimal number of aided and government colleges. So only way to get higher education was parallel colleges. So let us, now it is almost extinct, parallel colleges. Still, let us remember, maybe the senior generation who is leading Kerala today are products of tutorial or parallel colleges. And I have heard stories that his classrooms, they were known for the intellectual vitality. He always encouraged the students to read widely, think critically, and approach literature with analytical clarity rather than mere admiration. As a teacher, he played a significant role in introducing more modern critical approaches to Malayalam literature and to the Kerala scenario. He is known widely as the founder of, maybe one of the founders of modern literary criticism in Malayalam. Before his time, as the senior generation know, literary discussion in Malayalam often remained limited to appreciation, moral judgment, or traditional aesthetics. Paul sir helped to shift criticism toward systematic analysis, evaluation, and comparison with world literature. The Arnoldian touched on. Through his essays and lectures, he helped to cultivate a culture of serious literary debate in Malayalam. He played a crucial role during the transformative period in Malayalam literature, when modern genres like novel and short story were developing in Kerala rapidly. First year students know Dr. Sukumar Azhikotte's famous essay, History of Short Story in Malayalam. So his criticism helped readers and writers to understand new forms in literature. As students of literature, especially those who are reading Malayalam literature, we know his influence can be seen in the development of modern literary criticism in Malayalam, the encouragement of young writers and new literary movements in Kerala, and also for introducing global literary perspectives to Malayalam literature and criticism. We remember him today as a brilliant teacher, a fearless critic, and as a scholar who connected Malayalam literature with world literature. Today, when we speak about the history of Malayalam literary criticism, the name of M.B. Paul stands among foundational figures who shaped modern criticism in Kerala. So, my dear students, friends, remembering Venerable M.B. Paul Sir is not recalling a scholar from the past. It is also an opportunity to reaffirm the values he stood for: intellectual honesty, critical thinking, openness to world literature, and a deep commitment to literary excellence. His work continues to remind us that literature grows stronger when it is accompanied by thoughtful and courageous criticism. Let me pay respectful tribute to Venerable M.B. Paul Sir, a legendary academician and accomplished literary critic. So now to today's lecture. It's my great privilege and joy to introduce our inaugural speaker, Dr. Sundar Sarukkai, one of the most original and influential contemporary philosophers in India. Dr. Sarukkai is widely known for his pioneering work in the philosophy of science, philosophy of language, and the philosophy of culture. His initial books are all on these topics. Over the past several decades, he has consistently encouraged or engaged with some of the most challenging intellectual questions of our times, like questions concerning science, knowledge, experience, ethics, and the human condition. Educated in physics and philosophy, Dr. Sarukkai's intellectual journey itself reflects a rare interdisciplinary depth. He completed his doctoral research in philosophy of science and has since developed a body of work that brings together scientific inquiry, philosophical reflection, and cultural analysis in deeply original ways. That's the greatness of his works. There is something original in every work. He has taught and conducted researches at several prestigious institutions, and he was mostly associated with Manipal Academy of Higher Education. I remember my friend Jobin doing PhD unto you. Maybe his famous works would be Translating the World, Philosophy of Symmetry, and The Cracked Mirror. Very engaging books. His writings are distinguished by their clarity, originality, and their ability to connect philosophical thinking with contemporary global debates. What is particularly remarkable about Dr. Sarukkai or his intellectual trajectory is his openness to new forms of expression. In recent years, Dr. Sarukkai is making his philosophical exploration through fiction. With so much of joy, I'm to announce before you his latest two novels. One is Following a Prayer and Water Days. I really relish reading Following a Prayer. All on a sudden, an ordinary girl of a village entering into the world of silence. She stopped speaking. She is embracing silence. Water Days is actually developing through an ordinary narrative വാട്ടർ ഡേയ്സ്, സിറ്റിയിൽ വെള്ളം കിട്ടുന്ന ദിവസമാണ്. But within that small plot, how he is introducing a philosophy of investigation, centering a woman in the novel. Brilliant, sir. So across all his writings, whether philosophical essays or cultural critiques or fiction, Dr. Sarukkai consistently engages with cutting-edge questions about knowledge, language, technology, and human experience. His work exemplifies a rare intellectual courage, the willingness to rethink familiar concepts in the light of changing historical and technological realities. So, it is therefore especially fitting that he is with us today to deliver the inaugural erudite lecture titled Literature and Criticism in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. At a time when artificial intelligence is transforming not only technology but also creativity, authorship, and interpretation, few scholars are better equipped to guide us through these complex questions than Dr. Sundar Sarukkai. Dear Professor, hearty welcome to his gathering and to the erudite lecture. Dr. Nitin Verghese, our HOD, is very much eager in providing new and variety intellectual feast to the department. Every lecture, seminar, or conference turns to be a festival of ideas and scholarship. We salute you, Nitin, for introducing great academicians and scholars to the department. With respect and gratitude, I welcome you to this memorial lecture. Now, as I look in the front rows, I'm humbled to see before me loving family members of M.B. Paul sir. I am surprised to see how Manacheri family is treasuring and perpetuating the legacy of a great patriarch of the family. The bond of blood is sacred and enduring. This erudite lecture is an attempt to sustain a legacy, disseminate a tradition, and to offer tribute to a father who made history and became a legend. I see before me Dr. Vincent Paul, Dr. Matthew Vincent, Mr. Paul Vincent, Professor K.V. Thomas, Ms. Usha Agustin, Bina Emson, and I have the name of everyone. Shortage of time, I'm not saying so. With so much of love, I welcome Venerable M.B. Paul sir's family to this gathering and to this lecture series. I can see our previous principal Reggiachan is with us, and our former teachers are with us, faculty members and students. So I welcome one and all to this gathering. Let us relish, let us enjoy, celebrate lecture by Dr. Sundar Sarukkai, and also let us enjoy the company of a family which is knit together by blood bond. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Jose, for that warm welcome and for setting the tone for today's event. We also welcome you to this event. Now, I request Dr. Nitin Verghese, Head of the Department of English, to deliver the HOD's address. So please.
Dear and respected Professor Sundar Sarukkai, our speaker, family members of Professor M.B. Paul, members of Professor M.B. Paul Trust, Father Jose Jacob, Father Reggie P. Kurian, Dr. A. Thomas, Dr. Gigi Joseph, dear colleagues, invited guests, research scholars, and my dear friends and students, good morning to you all. Every department has its routines, the timetables, the meetings, and the looming deadlines. But every now and then, there comes a day when a department must pause. We look back at our own journey and ask, what kind of intellectual tradition do we belong to? Today is one such moment for us. As the head of the Department of English, my duties today are twofold. First, I want to thank the family of Professor M.P. Paul. I want to thank the M.P. Paul Trust for their generosity. Actually, your support sustains a tradition of intellectual courage. So I gratefully acknowledge your role in making this lecture series a reality. I also want to express my heartfelt thanks to two of our senior teachers, Dr. P.J. Thomas and Dr. Raju Sebastian. So P.J. sir's role was absolutely crucial in materializing this event. And through all the stages of planning, Raju sir was there with help and support in so many ways. So both P.J. sir and Raju sir, thank you for your guidance and for always being there for this department. So I want to make it clear that the very sense of tradition that brings me to our speaker today, Professor Sundar Sarukkai. Actually, I wanted to share a quick story about how this invitation actually happened. When we first started planning this inaugural lecture, I'll be honest, I was a bit anxious. Because the first lecture sets the tone for everything that comes after. I was sharing these worries with my colleague, Mr. Anish. Then, quite by accident, I came across an interview. It was a piece appeared in Halter Skelter by Miss Srinivasan, where she was talking with Professor Sarukkai about his novels, especially Water Days. I was fascinated by that conversation. I remember thinking, this is exactly the voice we need. I wrote to him in October. I got a reply in November. And finally, he agreed. So thank you, Professor Sundar, for being here today to help us to honor the legacy of one of our great teachers, Professor M.P. Paul. And this brings me to the second part of my duty today, to remember and to introduce the man we are all here to honor, Professor M.P. Paul. Honestly speaking, I am probably not the best person to talk about a figure of his stature. And my only real qualification today is that I happen to be the chair of my department. But because of that role, I feel it is my duty and my responsibility to introduce him and to do so in a way that truly honors his legacy. Even so, when we speak of Professor M.P. Paul, we are remembering a giant of Kerala's cultural renaissance. Vaikom Muhammad Bashir, our beloved Bepur Sultan, once described him in a way that I think sums up perfectly. He called him a man modest and restrained, a great scholar, dynamic thinker, and above all, a lover of mankind. This is Professor M.B. Paul, a lover of mankind. And Professor Paul was part of a truly golden era of our department. He shared these halls and these classrooms with a generation of giants. Scholars like Professor V.V. John, who later became the Vice Chancellor of Jodhpur University, Professor C.S. Kurian, Reverend Father Joseph Kuritadam, who later became the principal of Fatima College, Kollam, and St. Thomas College, Palai. He worked alongside Professor A.P. O'Brien, who went on to head the English department of BHU, as well as Professor Sahasranama Iyer and Professor C.A. Shepherd. So when you hear these names together, you realize the incredible intellectual energy that defined our department during his time. So even among such great teachers, Professor Paul was unique. He believed in a simple but powerful idea, art for life's sake. For him, literature had to be meaningful, literature had to be accessible, and above all, deeply human. We can see this clearly in something that he did in 1937. That year, he founded the S.B. Shakespeare Theatre. You know, in those days, staging a full-length Shakespeare play was not easy. It required courage, effort, and a great deal of determination. On the college day in 1937, the department staged Macbeth, directed by Professor M.B. Paul. But he did not remain behind the scenes. He himself stepped on the stage and played the role of Macbeth. And 10 years later, again when Macbeth was staged, his own son was part of it. Thank you, sir, for that. And we stand here today, we are moving into the 90th year since the SB Theatre began. Since 1937, the department has staged 21 productions. And the most recent was Henry IV Part 1, directed by Dr. Vimal Mohan John, assisted by Dr. Neville Thomas. There is also a coincidence here. Today is also a college day. So it feels as if the thread that began in 1937 still continues. I can feel his presence here today. But Professor Paul's work went far beyond the theatre stage. He was a pioneer who changed how we think about Malayalam literature. Before him, most people focused only on old-fashioned poetry, but he shifted that focus to the modern energy of novels and short stories. Through his famous books like Novel Sahityam, he helped to see stories in a whole new way. He was also a true defender of writers. In a time when authors struggled to survive, he helped to start a cooperative society, the Sahitya Pravartaka Sahakarana Sangam, because Professor Paul believed that writers should be paid fairly and they live with dignity. He was not afraid to challenge old, rigid ways of thinking. For him, the freedom to think and speak was the most important thing for any society. As we present the research awards today, I hope our students and research scholars, they see themselves as part of this same tradition, a tradition of curiosity, a tradition of courage, and a tradition of independent thinking. Today we are facing a brand new frontier. Professor Paul had to fight to keep literature focused on the human experience against the rigid rules of his day. But today, we face a different kind of question. As AI, as artificial intelligence begins to change the ways we read and write, we must ask ourselves, how do we keep literature human in the age of machines, in the age of AI? As technology reshapes many parts of our lives, perhaps we can still look at the example Professor Paul left behind, that literature must remain connected to human experience. That belief can continue to guide us as we move forward. Actually, these are some of the questions that bring us to this inaugural lecture by Professor Sundar. Dear Sir, it is a great pleasure and an honor to have you with us to speak on literature and criticism in the age of AI, artificial intelligence. Actually, we are eager to hear your insights. I hope this lecture becomes the beginning of an open and thoughtful conversation, a conversation in the spirit that Professor M.P. Paul valued, a spirit of inquiry, a spirit that asks questions, a spirit that encourages us to read carefully, think independently, and speak with courage. Thank you all for being here today to remember our past and think about our future together. I wish you all a great learning experience. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for those warm words and for your continued initiatives such as this. It is now my honor to introduce our distinguished speaker for the day. Josachin has already done an exceptional job. I'm only echoing his words. Professor Sundar Sarukkai is one of India's most respected contemporary philosophers. His work spans the philosophy of natural and social sciences, ethics, and philosophy of technology. He served as professor of philosophy at the National Institute of Advanced Science in Bangalore and was the founder director of the Manipal Center for Philosophy and Humanities. He is the founder of Barefoot Philosophers, an initiative to take philosophy to children and public. In today's rapidly evolving technological landscape, where artificial intelligence is transforming the ways we read, write, and think, Professor Sarukkai's insights promise to open new perspectives on literature and criticism. We are deeply honored to have him with us today. With great pleasure, I invite Professor Sundar Sarukkai to deliver the inaugural lecture of Professor M.P. Paul Memorial Eminent Scholar Lecture Series on the topic Literature and Criticism in the Age of AI. Before Professor Sarukkai take on the podium, I request our Vice Principal Joe Sachin to honor him with a ponnada, reflecting our gratitude and love.
Thank you. It's really a humbling experience to be in front of all of you today. Thank you, Father Joseph Jacob, Dr. Nitin Varghese, the family members of Professor M.P. Paul, and students and faculty and friends. As Dr. Nitin mentioned, he did write, when he wrote to me, the reason why it took some time for me to accept was not because I didn't want to come. I've heard a lot about this college. I have so many of my friends who are actually from Kottayam that it seems like a kind of a homecoming for me when I come to Kottayam. It was actually because I was intimidated by the personality of Professor Paul and the kind of work and impact he has had. Intimidated in the sense that whether I would be able to do justice to his memory. And so, because, whenever I speak to many of my friends, as I said, many of whom come from Kerala, my students and others, many of them talk about they're all, they know Professor M.P. Paul well. They talk about Professor Paul in terms of the influence he has had from the time they were in school. And I'm not from Malayalam literature. I'm not even from literature. I'm actually at the outlier of all disciplines, including philosophy and the sciences. And so I hesitated. But then everybody I spoke to felt that it was such an important thing to be able to pay our respects to Professor Paul that I took the courage to foolishly accept, and in the hope that there is some little justice I can do to the kind, not only to his memory, but to thinking through the impact he has had, not just on the discipline, but on our cultural imagination. But after I started thinking more and preparing for this talk and read much more about his work, I felt a great sense of kinship with him, a kind of a kindred spirit, because it was almost uncanny in many of his writings about the nature of disciplines, the criticism he had about literature, the questions he had about the function of a discipline in terms of its responsibility to society, all of which echoed many of the preoccupations I've had in my own career. So it was almost like the fact that I'm coming here and speaking here is like a homage I do as a student to somebody who has actually thought very deeply about it and was written extensively about it. And to me, in this sense, this memorial is like a thanksgiving for somebody. The way we want to memorialize somebody is not just about what they had done when they were there with us, but the imagination of a new future they have given to all of us. The imagination of how to see the future of our world, to see the future of our students who are sitting here. And it is that thanksgiving, the spirit of that I want to start with this memorial lecture. As I said, I'm still very humbled by this invitation, and I hope you will see this as a very small offering of respect to not only a remarkable personality, but as Father Jacob said, also to his family who has been able to sustain that memory, and to the English department and to the college here who thought it important enough to establish a memorial lecture. We have all heard a lot about Professor Paul and his work, Father Jacob's wonderful summary of his work, and what Dr. Nitin also mentioned about it. So I want to start with a very simple question. Why should his work matter to us today? Why should we think about his work? We understand him as a personality. We have understood what he did in terms of the impact on Malayalam literature and Malayalam society. But how is it that we are able to think about the consequences of his work today? I want to begin this talk in the spirit of Professor Paul. The fact that he began his own work with a particular critique of the problems of literature of his time, when he recognized that contemporary Malayalam literature had not made the move to understanding and writing about contemporary society. And therefore, the critique of his traditional Malayalam literature made him move towards prose and fiction as against poetry, as he repeatedly points out. So it is that moment of criticism and critique which drives Professor Paul's initial work. It is in that spirit that I want to begin with, by asking, what is the crisis facing literature today? What should I learn from his approach to his own work about literature to see if there are any meaningful questions we can draw upon that in order to understand and respond to this great challenge to literature's relationship in the age of artificial intelligence. There are many points of Professor Paul's trajectory that I want to draw upon, and I'll just mention it briefly here, just so that, especially for the younger generation, to recognize the impact of his work and how it has actually distilled to many other disciplines and not just to literature. For example, this wonderful work by Professor Tarakan points out many of these points, but you can read more about that. So one of the interesting questions about Professor Paul's work is that although he had his roots in Western literature, he started thinking and imagining about the possibility of aesthetics and literature in the context of Malayalam. His engagement with Malayalam literature became so deep that at points he talks about the fact that he wished he could have been a critique of Malayalam and writer in Malayalam and so on. So here was this person who draws upon a particular intellectual tradition, what is loosely called as Western literature and Western criticism and theories of aesthetics, in order to reflect upon the growing idea of contemporary Malayalam literature. That is one important point. And part of the motivation for that was for Professor Paul was to present new standards of literary excellence to the new generation. And to make sure, and this is such an important point that I want to keep coming back to make sure that novels responded to contemporary life. And what does it mean? How does it, I mean, for us to really understand the impact of it, especially the younger generation who has grown up over the last 50 years reading novels of contemporary life, is to imagine a time 40, 50, 60 years back, or now 70 years and over back, where if you wanted to read a novel, its engagement with the very important questions of society were not its preoccupations. It was about traditional stories, histories, Puranas. It was about particular forms of classical aesthetics. To be able to challenge a whole writing movement, a writing culture, to be able to shift its concerns to making sense of your everyday life is one of the great contributions of Professor Paul, which then ripples through all the kind of literature that many of you may read in your own courses today. Therefore, as Professor Tarakan points out, it was, quote to quote him, it was Paul who introduced for the first time in Malayalam the inseparable relation between literature and society as a fundamental principle of fundamental principle of literature. In that, to connect to another important theme which we'll come back to make sense of the AI question, is his repeated point that art is not for art's sake and pleasure is not the purpose of art. Points which he makes repeatedly as the founder president of the Kerala Progressive Writers Organization, where which also leads to his kind of the conflict with the communist groups here, was his repeatedly reminding us that the idea that there is something called art which is only interested in its own aesthetic world, in its own aesthetic preoccupations, without recognizing its connections to society, its responsibilities to society, is something which he completely disagreed upon. Therefore, in doing this, he was also asking some fundamental questions about what is the function of literature. Okay, I'll come back to this point because it's something which I think is extremely important in the way we understand literature today. So there are, so with many of these basic ideas and also about his constant concern about the idea of humanity and the importance of our relationship with other humans, with those as some basic founding principles, we can then begin by asking the question, in the spirit of Professor Paul, what exactly is the basic crisis that literature faces today? And now, for many of us, you may think that AI is just another kind of a technology, and we have been immersed in a world of technologies. So what is really new about it? So what is new about it are actually many. Today, literature and criticism are under a great challenge from artificial intelligence. It is not just about the fact that that is a technology which is available to us. It is that the everyday functions of literature and literary criticism have been deeply impacted by the kinds of progress in what we call as AI. And I'll look at some of those examples to see how we can think through this question. And secondly, the challenges are both aesthetic and social. So it is not just the fact that AI is producing something, more number of books and so on, but it's the fact that our very definition of what constitutes literature, our very definition of the literariness of texts are itself being challenged by what generative AI, particularly generative AI, is doing, like your ChatGPT machines and so on. So, for example, Amazon was, there's in an article it was pointed out that Amazon publishes around 30 to 40,000 books per month that have something to do with AI. So one very convenient way of talking about it is to say they are AI assisted, but these are officially accepted that they are AI assisted 30,000 to 40,000 books. We don't know how many of them are actually written through AI bots. And there was, in the same report, it was mentioned that Amazon has requested that not more than 3 or 4 books produced by AI can be put online by an author per day. I mean, you think about this. We thought that writing was a skill, was an art. That writing needed, it spoke to something fundamental about the nature of being human. And it took time. Writers are notorious for taking years to write a book and then fighting with their editors for many years before the book gets published. And today, literally speaking, an AI bot can produce a text for you in a matter of hours or days. It does everything: cover page, design, print out, and it can put any kind of characters you want. It can, it is of a completely different order. So obviously, in terms of the production of writing, in terms of the production of books, this seems to be a kind of an impact of a particular technology. But it is not just around that. If you look at many of the AI books, many of the books are actually based on information and self-help books. There are many actually books like this which get published, and they are very fast to produce. You can actually, with the help of AI, produce a book on, let's say, better management techniques or whatever it is, very, very fast. And actually, I must say that using AI is slightly better than other kinds of things I have had. For example, once there was a book which was published on the history of untouchability by one of the publishers in Delhi, and somebody forwarded me a chapter from that book, which was exactly the chapter of my paper on phenomenology of untouchability, which was published, is part of my cracked mirror book. It is exactly that. In fact, pardon me? Yeah, see, this goes beyond plagiarism. What I'm saying is, this person did not cut and paste something from my article. The whole article was reproduced. That fellow is thanking the same people I have thanked in the original paper. And then I said, this is very odd that there is actually a book published. It was selling for some 600 rupees or something. Then I checked the other chapters. The whole book is taken from other people's published works and some 8 chapters on questions of untouchability, because they thought maybe it was going to sell that day, that time. And they had put all this. And the funniest thing is, nobody knew how to stop this book. So I wrote to them. We don't even know, these publishers. So I wrote to Oxford University Press, because they had published Cracked Mirror, and Cracked Mirror carried this article, my book with Professor Gopal Guru. And so I told them, look, there is a violation of your publishing rights, because they have published an article from your book into that. Until then, they didn't take any action. And then they wrote to them, and the funniest thing was this, that the publishers sent back a letter to OUP after they got the legal notice, saying that we are not able to trace the author. What I'm saying is, the fact that people are actually reproducing books which they didn't write may not be completely new, but it has been taken to a completely new scale by AI and what the AI machine has been able to do. So, other than just this publishing of these self-help books, etc., through AI, there is also a large number of fake books which have been published now. So one of the big problems which publishers have is the fact that if there is let's say, a very well-known author's book, immediately on the same topic with very similar sounding things, there are books which are published through AI and put on the market. So in other words, it detracts away from the original book which was published, which had a value, and these publishers are, so that becomes part of the thing. So in other words, that it has impacted an enormous number of people. A recent project from Cambridge talked to many of the writers in UK, and they discovered that the majority of the writers are actually scared for their careers. They are saying that they cannot survive as writers today. Not only because of plagiarism and so on, or what AI does, but on different contexts. One is they talk about loss of income, and they also think that in the next few years, generative AI is going to replace fiction writers. And so this was a kind of a moment for the community of writers to ask themselves, then what do I do under this onslaughts of these machines producing this kind of creative work? The earliest answer to this was that the creative work is not creative at all, and we can know what AI really generates, okay? And we'll come to that in a bit. So along with the impact on writing and the writing community as such, it is actually impacted on publishers. We have Mr. Ravi DC here, so I'm sure they as publishers are also encountering problems with AI produced books, and many publishers and agents today want a undertaking from people who send material to them saying that this is not AI produced, that you have to give a undertaking that you have not done that, because there is no way you can actually make out how these are doing what they are doing. The kind of early plagiarism checks we had with ordinary plagiarism no longer hold good for these kinds of generative AI. So the whole community of writing and the writers and the impact on publishers and writers makes us ask this larger question. What does doing literature in today's time mean? What does it mean to write at all? For me, the earliest concern about this was actually not about writing books, because I'm still of that generation where I thought a machine can never write like I do, which I'm completely wrong, I must confess by now. But I was more concerned about something which was part of my passion in my life, which is teaching. It is in teaching that we first saw the great impact of already these generative AIs. And I'm sure all of you as teachers here and know this very well. And all of you as students also, I'm sure you are very happy that you have ChatGPT to help you. And this is a conflict which we have to resolve, because on the one hand, what we thought as teachers was that whenever I gave them so for us, the basic thing in philosophy or humanities in general or social sciences is to train students to read extensively and to write critically, to write essays about it, to reflect on it from different perspectives, to argue through points and so on. And that's the real foundation of what we do as teaching, because we don't have any content to really communicate and teach. It's basically a training of the ways of reading and writing and thinking about something. Now, we discovered that once you have these ChatGPT machines, any of the assignments, so our standard model was that we would have assignments, we give them something to read and then write about it, or we would have end-term assignments, we would write long papers to get them to train to write. And then many times I realized in one of the courses I was teaching, that particular year, I had some fantastic answer papers. People had really done very good work, written very well. And I was quite surprised, because this is for some, another program for women leadership program and so on. And I was very pleased that they had actually been able to do it so well. It was a few years back, and we had not really measured the impact of AI on writing. And the TA who was assigned to my course and myself, we went through all of it and we graded them, and we had no doubt at all. Until some of the students who scored very badly in our grading, who didn't score as well, came and told us that all the people who are given very high marks all did it through AI. And they said, you are penalizing us because we did not use AI. And this is very odd. You see, what is happening is we were grading the human effort of these students, which we thought was not good enough, and graded all the machine products as very good, because in our reading, there was no way we could distinguish it. And until the students came and said it, there was no way we could make out what was AI or not, until they told us what those other students did. So then now I do a very simple thing. People often criticize ancient systems. Ancient means our time, our school systems and so on, about, exams and so on. I think exams are the best way to go now, because what I do is, all these years I used to do the end-term assignments and get them to write and stuff. Now I tell them, I'll give you some paper and pen, and 3 hours or 2 hours, I'll give you one question. So it's not memory. I'm going to give you a thinking question, but you sit and write in front of me with no machines, no thing. But there is a problem. I wish it works. You know what? most students have forgotten how to write with pen. So they say that, look, I can't write with paper and pen. You give me a pen, I don't know how to scribble on the paper. So they say, you give me a laptop. Children in schools today are taking down, supposedly they're taking down notes in laptops, which means that writing, the embodied way of learning, and this is something which philosophers and cognitive scientists have talked about for a long time. It's the body which learns. It's not some mental abstract faculty which learns. It's body's action which takes you into what learning is, produces knowledge in you. And if you don't know how to use your finger to pick up the pen and scribble and scratch and write really bad stuff, you're not going to learn writing. You know, the problem with this, even with the earlier technologies of the Microsoft, doc experiment, they had this thing called, spell check. So spell check is one of the worst. It's very good for me for my final thing before I submit a manuscript. But it's a worst teaching tool because the students don't know whether THIER or THEIR. Because they don't need to know that. As they are typing, it automatically converts it. So they don't even know what mistake they have done. It converts, it changes sentences. They are not the ones who have been producing that writing. The machine is already part of the production of the writing process. So these were challenges, not just to the final act of literature and what people are writing in terms of fiction and essays, but in terms of teaching. If we thought the computer was a problem, with generative AI, it has gone one step. It is not just the fact that students write answers through the help of AI. That's okay. To many of them, they are saying that's the way we learn. It is the fact that today, and I'd really feel bad saying this as a teacher, because we think as teachers, we are trying to communicate and teach people, students in the thing. And some of the students, my nephew and niece were all studying in these universities, a few of them, around the country. And you know what they said? They and their friends, what they do after sitting in a class, they go back to the room. All of them have a bot, a chat GPT or any other bot, an AI bot, which tutors them, which teaches what the teacher did. So they sit in a class and they feel, oh, I don't understand what the teacher has taught. They go back to the room and tell that bot, can you please explain some principle, whatever they are supposed to have learned in class. And that bot sits with them one-on-one, goes step by step and teaches them that. And this means it's not just, okay, I'm sorry to bring this kind of news to a teaching institution, but just like writers are worried, they're all going to become defunct, teachers too should be worried. In the sense that, if you have enough bots coming and doing some of these things, you'll have to ask, what is our function as a teacher? In other words, all these kinds of technological interventions are pushing us into what Professor Paul was telling us to do. How do you critically think of your location? How do you critically think of your action? And if we don't do that, if we don't have that critical distance to be able to reflect on what we are doing and what our supposed function is, then we have lost the game, either as teachers or writers. In terms of literary and criticism in general, most people have seen this. I think it's very difficult for teachers who teach lit crit to actually engage with the classroom like earlier. Because if you think of literary criticism as a framework to read literary texts, you could have a Marxist reading, a feminist reading, and so on. Now, all that you have to do with the generative AI is to get some fantastic analysis of texts. Students can't do the kind of analysis of text that the generative AI is able to do. In terms of how it is able to look at the text, break it up, look for new patterns, put new perspectives, and so on, which is what your large amount of literary criticism is doing. So the question, therefore, is, what then should I be doing? Should we change our understanding of literary criticism? Should we change our understanding of literature? So that's the first question which I want to begin with. To make this problem a little more complicated is the fact that there are genuine impact of assistance from AI. Many writers, very well-known writers, by the way, today acknowledge that they publish books which are AI assisted, not AI written. So for example, AI assistance includes fact checking, So I may write a whole book. Have I been consistent about everything? You know, I may have had some 100 characters, and let's say I forgot in some place I said one character was born in some place, let's say Kottayam, and somewhere else I mentioned that they were in Trivandrum. That AI checks that. So basic questions of, presumably the act is that I write, but the AI does the quote unquote editorial menial jobs of checking whether facts are right, whether my narrative is right. It also helps with ideas and suggestions. There are authors who, many high-selling authors, who say that they talk to the AI in order to get suggestions for characters. So this is a very interesting collaborative process of AI writing. So it's not just about whether AI is doing the writing, but how much is it going to give you suggestions about what kind of characters will work here, what won't work, how do you structure the plot, how do you move through your narrative, and so on. And this, so far at least, publishers and many well-known writers too do not see as a conflict. They see that it is okay as long as you're able to mention that where you're going to use where you've used the AI for what. But that's going to become much more bigger problem very soon. For example, one other immediate impact which has impacted a lot of basic labor in this is audiobooks. Audiobooks, you needed, that itself is separate art. You need this whole presence of a human being able to interpret a text through their voice. That's really audiobooks. Nobody reads books, right? You have to interpret, you have to reproduce the book through your speech. Now today, there are enormous number of books which are done as audiobooks by machines at a fraction of the cost. Then, because if you are doing it with a human being, you have to hire a studio, you have to pay that person, and so on and so forth. And you are actually, that whole process takes a very long time. But now with these machines, you're able to produce audiobooks very fast. Earlier, one thought that these were just, a kind of repetitive labor. But now, not just with the audio books, with the research sector, by the way. In science research, we know that there are now many AI machines which do the basic functions of a research project. I was reading an interview with some French well-known physicist, and he was talking about his lab. It is already a few years back. He said, I now have only robos and these machines in his lab, because he said, I don't have to worry about people complaining about wanting to sleep and wanting more raise in pay, etc. Because he said these machines work 24/7 for him. So, and these are creative work. It's not just ordinary repetitive work. They are actually solving new problems, producing new models, and so on. So in all this kind of conflict, we have to be able to ask ourselves, what do we then do? One of the first responses to it was that we can make out what is AI written. And as one writer said in one of the articles I was reading, to quote him, he says, quote, "It feels cheap because it is cheap." He was talking about AI produced text. You can make out, he said. But I think that belief that it is cheap because it feels cheap because it's cheap, and also the belief that they thought that AI cannot do fiction. They said maybe they can do essays, they can do the self-help books, putting information together. It cannot do fiction because it's something of the creative, and they were completely wrong about it. And there are many examples of AI poetry today, which it will need a lot of, and I don't know how, but I presume some of you who teach all this literature may be able to find out, but I think it's going to be a challenge. There are some really remarkable, not just poetry, in music. One of the earliest things, much before the sophistication of today, a few years back, there is a AI machine, which, as all of you know, jazz is one of the more challenging musical forms because of improvisation, and it's not set. You can't set the music to it, and you respond to the music and the energy of your collaborators. If suddenly somebody decides to play something else, you have to follow through. And here was this machine which was in a quartet, a four-person band, jazz band, which was fully improvisational, which was just amazing. There is no way you can make out it is not a human who is playing that. So, all these then make us ask the question, why should we not just give in to all this? Why should we just say, okay, let the machines do what they want to do? Why not accept that they're anyway going to do this, and maybe we will think of what we should do as something else. When Gary Kasparov, we all know of him as a great chess player, but unfortunately, he wrote a book where he also wanted to talk about technology, which you should have thought a little more about, because it's an interesting book. It's called Deep Thinking. He wrote about the time when chess overthrew human capabilities in chess. So this was the famous match in late 90s when Gary Kasparov played the IBM machine, Deep Blue. And he lost to that in a second match of it. He lost. So the book is actually a recounting of that. When he first lost, he refused to believe it was a machine which defeated him. He claimed that IBM had hid the grandmaster behind the machine and that's why they defeated him. But it was just the pure machine playing. And he said once he recognized it, and then his whole book is the fact that, look, there is no point in playing against machines anymore. The world's greatest chess players don't play machines. Machines have become coaches for them. You learn from machines. And in fact, today, if you want to have the greatest fight between two highest rated chess players, there are two machines which play against each other. You have the stockfish and then you have the learning machine Alpha Zero. So they are the ones who can actually play matches with each other because no human can play. The world's greatest chess masters cannot play against a machine. And so Kasparov writes in that, he says, don't keep fighting all these machines. Earlier time when you had washing machine and stuff, it allowed you, it gave you the freedom from, the drudgery of everyday work, physical labor. It really released us from various kinds of physical labor. And then he says, these machines, these thinking machines and AI machines, what they do now is they release you from menial mental acts. What does he mean by menial mental acts? That is just like thinking of, why should I be washing clothes and washing vessels? Let the machine do it. He's saying mental acts. So remember that the whole point about the AI, the difference how it is different from other machines is that the machine's concern, the artificial intelligence, the digital world's concern is about your mental faculties, not about your physical capabilities. And what are the mental faculties which you can give away to the machine? Just like you are given away washing? Memory, remembrance, remembering your phone number, your house address and so on. Because now how many of us, 30 years back, I had to memorize all my friends' phone numbers. Now, we don't know anybody's numbers. We just, whatever the machine tells me is what I read the number and the name. There's no correlation. Addresses, what I mean by address is not just memory of an address. What is a very important philosophical problem, right? That is, how do I conduct myself in the world? How does my body orient itself in the world? That orientation of the body in the world, what a philosopher like Merleau-Ponty would call motility, the capacity of the body to move and perceive through the body motions. We have lost it. Why? Because basic things of where some places from your house you don't know because you put it on your Google map. Where you turn, right, left. In other words, the world as it appeared to me, as I negotiated as a human being, is lost when the Google map is negotiating it for you. It's saying take left, take right. It may be very efficient. It may reach you in the fastest time. But what you have lost is your complete experiential world of living in that city, in that moment at that time. That is impossible to recapture. That is not a menial mental task. It is such an important aspect of it. The other menial mental task is calculating. We don't calculate now. When I remember when I was doing science and I had to do a lot of mathematics. For mathematics, you had to learn everything like differential equation, integration. All of these are very tough, especially I was doing theoretical physics. So all of this, you had to learn how to do this basic integral differentiation. Today, I know so many students, very good students, by the way, in science. They just have apps to do these differentiation and integration, which I thought was the basic learning tool which you needed to do maths. But any of the very complex problems, they can just put it into these things. So this is the question we need to ask. And how will we ask this question? And what framework would we be asking this question? And I think Here is where I remember Professor Paul very much. Because the first question about how we can critically engage with the technologies, and let's accept the fact that we are seduced by these technologies. These technologies are meant as weapons of seduction, and there's no doubt about it. These are weapons of mass seduction. Because they are meant, in fact, now, presently, the court case which is happening against Facebook, Zuckerberg is going to the court, right? Is actually about how many of the social media have, algorithms and models to make people more drawn into it, to get them addicted. So a mother has put this case against them for saying that your product is an addictive process and you're doing it consciously. It's not just that it so happens it's an addictive process. So when you do this, and we're all caught in it, and it's very easy to say, step out of it, don't do it, etc. Maybe it's possible, I don't know how. Because the whole society works towards it. You can't step out of it because right from whether when you're traveling on your tickets, whether you're entering to your bank, everything has been got into this particular machine. So we need to find a framework to be able to critically think through it. And the first question I want to point out to these kinds of machine things is to say, what kind of crises do these machines actually create in our lives? The first one is a major questions of social crisis. And so the first point I think, which is very important, and whenever we do technology studies, is the first point I think it's worth re-emphasizing, especially for our students, is that technology is often sold under a false pretension that technology, it does not matter where a technology is produced, that technology is acultural. I make a washing machine somewhere and bring it into India, it's the same washing machine, whether it's used in Africa, Australia, America, or India. So technologies by themselves are just gadgets which don't have anything to do with your cultural practices. And that is fundamentally wrong. Because we adapt ourselves to technology. Technology doesn't adapt itself to us. Just to illustrate, just as an example, to illustrate it as a metaphorical thing for you to think about, when you get, let's say, a gadget from the US, which is on 110 volts, you have to have an adapter to make it run in our 220 volts, right? That adaptation we are constantly doing. We are changing our lives to fit into the structures of technology, and not that technology changes its character to fit into our cultural norms. But who is producing this technology? Whose culture is being represented by technology? I'll give you one other example, which I find very useful to communicate this point. When washing machines came, and I was many decades ago, I was in Chennai, and somebody had bought, apparently, there are two types of washing machines, right? The front loader and the top loader. That is, you open the thing from the top and put, other one you open from the front. And so this person was in Chennai, and somebody had told them, oh, this very good front loader is better and all that. And this person had bought that front loader. And then she was telling me, it's the worst decision in her life, because in top loader, in a place like Chennai, which always has water problems, you would fill water in a bucket and pour it on the top. Because, you can do that. But in front loader, she can't do it. You can't fill a bucket of water and try and pour water into the front loader. And she said, so we got all of this without recognizing that the social problem of that city, which had water problem, was not amenable to this. And in fact, remember that many of the people who talk about sustainability say this, by the way, about one of the most important and common problems which most of us in urban areas face. The Western commode. The flush, the amount of water it takes is much more than the water which others earlier, let's say traditional toilets used to have. And for societies which do not have water problem, it is not a big deal. So in places with which you have huge water problem, like it happened in many parts of Tamil Nadu and so on, and of course if you go to the north, etc., the using of a flush is actually a major waste of water, because there is no water for you to be able to afford that. In other words, what I'm saying is, all these technologies encode the social characteristics of the society they are produced from, or where they come from. And therefore, it's a good way to think about technology is, this famous image of a Trojan horse, right? So Trojan horse looks like it's just a horse which is being brought to your place, but inside it is hidden all those things which come out once they have entered your place. Inside it, you come in with all the cultural parameters which matter to the society which produced it, but when we use it without thinking, we are reproducing all of that. A very important example with our smartphones today is many of the apps which have been produced for the needs and functions of other societies. You look at Swiggy and Zomato, you may think, oh, it's so useful, it's wonderful, we can buy things on it. But let me tell you, even in a place like Bangalore, which is of course very urbanized, just below my house is a small road market where a lot of these migrant laborers go to the market, buy basic vegetables and coriander leaves and chilies and stuff. They sell it all there. So all of us had to go there and buy it. Now those women who go at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and that's part of my image of water days, who go by and sit in the cold Bangalore nights every night, are telling me they cannot compete with people who order the same 10 rupees coriander leaves from us app. Not only is it that all these people's functions, their livelihood is getting lost, it is that all the people, especially the young people who don't come out and have lost the whole sense of a relationship with the community. They don't know who these people are. They have never walked on the market smelling those things, smelling each one of those vegetables and flowers and whatever else that you sell and buy and talk to them and go back home. It's gone because we have produced a whole set of labor of young people in India who are sitting on motorbikes just to carry 10 rupees coriander leaves from this place to your house. Swiggy and Zomato were very important for a society which was an aging society, like in Scandinavian countries, when there was no young youth labor. They needed them to be able to sustain a world for these older people. But in India, we have the largest number of below 40 youth. We are the world's largest youth labor. And you know what we are doing now with them in the name of these apps is that we are producing we have done a great disservice to this youth because we have taken many of them, particularly migrant and young rural youth, and made them into service drivers on running, not even protected labor. I mean, that's a whole gig labor problem is another kind of a problem. Does Indian society need this kind of technology? Every technology has its positives. So we can't say, oh, it's also good. The thing I would always like to say is, if you look at medicinal traditions, medicines have always used poison. Poison in the sense, something becomes poison only at a particular level. At another level, it can actually function as a medicine. You have, let's say, very small doses. So to say that something is helpful is not an argument to sustain technology and AI. Because there will always be some things which will help you. But you have to ask the larger question, how do I evaluate this impact? What it does to our social and cultural world? And that's why, as I began with Professor Paul's point repeatedly about literature, its response and connection to contemporary social world and to the very idea of humanity. Because that is really at stake in all of this. The other problem, particularly with AI, which is not as much in the other technologies, is the fact that AI are actually learning machines, right? They are the generative AI, what is special about it is it learns. And so you don't have to feed in everything, you have to feed in some things and it learns its own new things, okay? So what they have now found in many projects over the last many years is that all your AI chatbots continue to do something very remarkably, which is a very, very remarkable problem, which is they have reproduced social biases. They have reproduced caste bias, class, and gender bias to a great extent. Recently, there was this example, just a couple of weeks back, a report from a research report which was, which people had done, where they pointed out, they gave 2 names to the AI agent and said, what can you tell about them? And the AI agent reproduces a stereotype. One name was a Brahmin name, another was a Dalit name, which the AI can discover because of its connections to all the other, it accesses everything, right? Then it writes a story. It is predicting the characters of these two people, okay, by their name. And it says what kind of work this person is probably doing. So it says that, for example, the Brahmin name, it says this is be very cultured person and so on. And the other name, working in some menial labor. How, the point is when you reproduce it, you can't make out. It looks like it's as if the machine has done its analysis and has produced something which is true or whatever. But it is reproduced the biases which are present in society. How does it reproduce bias? It reproduces bias because the machine, basically, the AI learns by trolling. It reads all the stuff which is written. And it reads about it, it pulls out various things from it and so on. The way it has been taught to pull out. Now, what are the dominant material which are already present in the web? Just like if you do this in Malayalam, you will see how much in other languages we have lost out in the AI thing. Because a lot of it is English-based trolling, right? The machines can search through all the search engines like Wikipedia, hundreds of sites, thousands, millions of sites in English. So it reproduces many of the ways by which these kinds of articles which have been written over centuries or years, till whenever you have loaded it into the machine, it is able to scroll through all of that and reproduce the dominant narratives of those. So if you have a very large number of colonial literature which is present, where when the British wrote about Indians or the natives in terms that Indians are lazy and they don't keep time, a scrolling of these kinds of things is available to these machines, and the machine is not able to make out at that particular point whether it's right in some sense, whether it's a colonial discourse, whether it's a prejudicial discourse and so on. And that becomes the story it reproduces for our users today. And this is a fundamental point which goes counter to the very idea of what it is to be a human being, which goes counter to the fundamental principle of dignity and respect to every human being. And that is reproduced by these machines. And to overcome this is a lot of work. The first work is to be able to critically engage and understand where these machines come from. They are not apples which have fallen from trees. They have been very selectively, consciously produced for certain kinds of ends. So that is another important point. The other very bigger problem is, of course, which we don't talk about when we talk about technologies, is the unseen costs. The amount of cost which it needs, the amount of energy which you need to run these machines is enormous. And we don't see that at all. Like somebody very famously said, when something is free, you can be sure it's not free. Because when we jump into all these apps and media and information and Gmail and Yahoo, etc., because it's all free. And it's a great form of seduction, though, that these are all free. But obviously none of it is free, and there is a cost. And the question is simple. It's not about whether these are right or wrong. Question is, are we aware of what we are doing? Are we aware of the cost you're paying when you use these free products? Okay? And so on. Now, of course, the biggest problem which writers particularly have with this is about image control. Because and you can actually do it, by the way. You can actually ask, when I was discussing this with my techie brother, who is very much a technocrat with all AI and all that. And so what he did is, he sent me something, which he later told me was a question he posed to ChatGPT and sent an answer. But he just sent a thing saying, oh, this is something which is written about your whatever thing. And the question was, what would be a book that Sarukkai would want to write but has not yet written? Okay, and he just sent me a long thing, and I was reading it and I said, my God, this is written so well. Because it talks about how I felt, okay? How I felt when I was doing physics. And why I felt dissatisfied with physics, and what I thought philosophy can do, and how I approach philosophy in order to write the book which I want to write but I have not written, which is done by ChatGPT. some low version. You can do any of the other versions. In other words, tomorrow, ChatGPT can write a better book that I would have written than I can write. This is a major issue of what people have tried to call as image control, copyright of the image. Because today, much of the, the information which the AI is using are actually things it has taken from all our ideas and it is able to using it for free. So this question about image control is to say, can it write a book saying this is what Sarukkai would say, etc., etc.? Can you do that? What are the kinds of controls over this? I mean, philosophy books nobody reads, it's not a big problem. But you can have somebody writing about big names in fiction or art or whatever else it is, and they can reproduce it, for example, in music and so on. Okay, anyway, so the other major question about writing and stuff where it has become very big problem is about translation. Earlier, we had questions about translation needed a great amount of training, people to recognize the nature of a book, the nature of creative work, and then convert it into thing. Today, it's not just about ordinary Google machine translation and so on. Today, publishers are actually doing complete translations of books through these machines. And again, really, as I'm saying, it just takes a matter of hours for a complex book to be done. And what they do is, we know that the machine is not going to be able to translate like what it is, but they think that through editing, human intervention after it has done, they can do something about it. So all of these has actually impacted on variety of levels on the meaning of what is authorship, what is meant by the act of writing, etc., and the questions of ethics. So I think I have a few more minutes. I'll conclude. Nitin? Yeah, okay. So I'll just end, therefore, with just one asking the question which I had when I was reading Professor Paul's work, is to say, what is it that I can draw upon his approach to literature and approach to understanding literary criticism in making sense of this conflict we have today, in making sense of this crisis that we are facing today. So the first question, and I think it's an important question which many times many writers may not want to ask. I don't want to ask that to myself many times, which is that the simple question, why write? Why should I write? Why should any of us write? And I say this because, as a PhD, if you have PhD students, that one of the fundamental tasks, both pleasure and a pain, is to get your students to finish the thesis writing. Right? They have to write these 400, 500 pages. And I'm very blessed that I've had wonderful students, but it's still a challenge because they keep asking you, why should I write this? How many pages should I write? What am I writing this 400-page thesis for? And I often used to tell them, never ask the question, why should I write? Because you won't write. Writing, if it becomes too self-conscious and say, what is the point of writing? You're not going to write. Writing is actually a very special act, by the way. And literature has to really re-engage with this fundamental concept of writing. Not just about why we write, because remember that writing is one of the newest forms of communication in human history. Writing, when people talk about the first novel, even in Malayalam, which Professor Paul writes about, you're talking about 150 years back. We talk about it as if there are millions of novels we have, etc. But the genres of novels, genres of poetry, different kinds of writing are all actually very, very new in human history compared to the long history that we have, compared to even the history of language. And more importantly, compared to the history of oral traditions, writing is very, very new. So the larger question I think we are challenged, which AI is posing as a fundamental challenge to us is, why are you writing? I can do it better, I'll do it faster. Like Kasparov says, don't do the memory storing of everybody's names in your head, store it in your machine. Writing too can become a menial mental act, which can be outsourced. But for that, when you say that, you are confronting the fundamental question of literature itself. What is that act of writing? What am I doing when I am writing? And that's a very important point, by the way, when Professor Paul is repeatedly saying that the function of literature or function of art is not art for art's sake, and function of literature is not for entertainment and so on. It is the same question. What is literature for? What should literature be and do? And if literature has to have a fundamental association with society and contemporary society, allows expression for those who don't have voice in society, allows writing to be able to reach out and discover the innermost wonder and the beauty of humanity, then that is a very different approach to the question of what writing is. In such a case, how do we look at the idea? So I'm not going to really, it's not a question, these are questions which are not rhetorical, but also not questions which are answerable fully now. But since many of you are all in literature, I thought these are kind of questions, especially for the students to think about, not just about why writing. Can you imagine literature as a category beyond writing? How does what other than writing becomes part of literature? What do you want to call as literature? Because remember, literature is a category produced as a form of valuing certain kinds of works, certain kinds of approaches, certain kinds of people who wrote about other people and so on. So I hope when you look at this question, think of this question as catalyzing this critical question: what is literature beyond writing? One of the writers in an interview, in an article in Paris Review, I was reading this interview quote from a writer, Elena Ferrante, who says, quote, "Literature that indulges the tastes of the reader is a degraded literature. My goal is to disappoint the usual expectations and inspire new ones." When she is saying this, what she's saying is, she's coming up with a definition of literature. What does she think the act of writing is doing? Whether we agree with her or not is secondary. But the act of writing as producing surprises, the act of writing as producing new insights of things you had not thought about before. And it is not just to the reader, it is to the writer too. And since Joseph was talking about my following a prayer, I must say that I learned a lot when I wrote it. It's not because I knew what the text was, what the story was, what the fiction was. All I had to do was inhabit the minds of these three girls. And there are a lot of things which, if you had asked me before, did you think of writing this? I would say, no, I really didn't think of writing it, right? So writing for me has that very important agential process. It is, to me, the important aspect why literature and writing can never be replaced by a machine. And maybe I'm still a romantic at heart, and maybe AI will disprove me next year or 2 years from now. But at least today, the argument I can make is that writing is something very unique to the idea of being human. One, it is a form of expression, of course, but it is not just a form of expression of what happens to me, I want to communicate to you. That communication the machine can do. It is also an act of empathy. It is an act of sharing myself with you, not just as a writer and reader. It is an act of being with my characters. I may not have been able to say all this just after when I'd been doing my philosophy books. I think for me, my experience of writing these novels actually makes me more sympathetic to what I'm trying to do, because I'm also trying to understand why am I writing these novels. I must confess that some of my philosophy colleagues were quite upset that I was writing novels, because they thought I'm really coming down from what I was doing because I'm writing stories. But for me, I always say that is a very important philosophical exercise, because I'm reflecting on that. And for example, in following a prayer, those girls are so close to me that there is no way I can dissociate myself from those young girls who are thinking about this question: where does a prayer go? What does language have to do with a prayer? That's all. But that notion of empathy is not a story. It is a lived experience. I'm living with them. I'm not telling you what they are thinking, what they are saying. And that's why some parts of the book, like in the end, was very difficult for me emotionally, because it's your life with them, right? And writing has that very important capacity that once you look at writing not as just pure representation, just representing what you have thought, which is, I'm sure since all of you are in literature, you have discussed this very extensively, and I heard Professor Norris also teaches a course here, and I'm sure done on Derrida and so on. But this idea, the critique that, every time I write, it's representing a thought or speech or an idea already there, which is a, completely wrong thing. Writing is an autonomous act. And so to my students who asked me, why should I write? I had only one simple answer. I always say, writing begets writing. I am not writing ideas. If I don't know what to write, I just pick up my pen and start writing. And once I have the first line that comes, then I know what the second line. It is writing which produces a second line, not me in my thought saying, this is my first line, this is my second line, third line. And once you give in to the agency of writing, goes back to another very interesting philosophical tradition associated, I would say, very deeply with philosophers in modern world like Heidegger, or with the grammarians in Indian tradition like Bhartrhari and others. It is that language is a life force, and you have to give in to language, not use language as a tool which I control and manipulate and express for your needs. We may do all of that, but the act of writing, that essential act of writing, is immersing yourself, dissolving yourself into language and letting language speak. Not me speaking what I want to speak through language. To me, that's a very important form of writing. A lot of great poetry captures that spirit of letting language speak what it needs to. And I am just like a pen is a tool for me to write. My fingers are the tool for language to write what it wants. That, in a disembodied machine world, is never possible. That understanding of this essential core of what it is to be human and what it is to write will never be possible. And in a way, when I look at, Professor Paul's repeated invocation of the importance of humanity, the importance of literature's relationship with the human, I go back to that question by asking, what is really fundamentally human about us? What is fundamentally human about us that is reflected not just in literature as a genre, but also in the very act of writing, whatever it is that we are writing? And therefore, to re-ask this question, what is literature in AI? You're basically asking this question, following Professor Paul's trenchant, immediate, urgent questioning about it, is to ask the question, what is the human condition? What is it to be human? What am I supposed? How am I as a literary person, as a writer? How is my humanity to be reflected in what I do? And therefore, there are two or three very quick points, and I'll just stop with that. One of the quick ways for you to understand, and I'm also saying this primarily to our students, for you to be able to go back and read Professor Paul's work, so that to see how do you discover. So part of our learning to read traditions, part of us remembering others and drawing upon the path they produce for us, is to be able to go read them critically. Take their points and see how it matters to you in your own life. So if you go look at Professor Paul's points on the novel, which is something which was also mentioned earlier, just look at 3 or 4 very important points. As I've repeatedly said before, some of the features of the novel which he points out are, it has to be immediately related to society. It should have the capacity to capture the inner and outer worlds. It should have the power to transform readers. And it should use conformity to life as a fundamental principle. In other words, a novel writing has to also have the capacity to produce experiences in the people who are reading it. Produce experiences in order that we are able to understand the sense of our human relation in a much deeper sense. So, to come back to his point repeatedly, it's a very simple point that novels should, quote, reform and elevate humanity. If that, take that as your starting point. Take that as your starting point when you engage with Professor Paul as a person, as an intellect, as an individual, as a family man, as a social reformer of various kinds. How do you then engage with that question? Ask yourself what it means to say, the task of a novel should be to reform and elevate humanity. And how does it matter in our own day-to-day lives? Where do we elevate humanity in our day-to-day interactions, in your classroom, outside your classroom, in the society that we live in? That is the challenge. It is not about reading a novel if you converted it as a form of entertainment or even as a form of logical analysis, just as a critical analysis, you're missing the point about this function of what the novel is. And I think that memory, that what he reminds us about, is something which is very useful for us to ask the same kind of question to AI, the function of AI in our daily lives. Can it elevate humanity in any sense through these relationships with these machines, through these relationships with my act of writing and so on? So, in other words, if writing, remember that the crisis which Professor Paul begins with is moving away from looking at writing as only about the past and look at it as writing interpreting the present and producing a future. If that is a fundamental act of literature, then how do we respond to AI in that spirit in order to understand what literature in the age of AI could actually mean? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Sarukkai, for that thought-provoking and illuminating lecture. Your reflections on the emerging technologies and AI in the field of literature, criticism, and cultural life have truly left bits to take us or take to home as food for thought. Thank you, Professor. Now we move on to a panel discussion. I kindly request C. Balagopal sir and Ravi DC sir to please initiate the discussion. And very own Vimal Mohan Jones sir as well. And I kindly request also our former HOD, Raju Sebastian sir, to please join them.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Raju Sebastian. I headed the Department of English till last year, and I'm very happy to see a much awaited memorial lecture series inaugurated today in a very meaningful way. I must congratulate Professor Sarukkai for the wonderful lecture that he delivered. I mean, it is not a a usual memorial lecture that we normally hear, because he really did his homework and came. Normally, when we listen to a memorial lecture, the speaker comes and after the initial remarks, get on with their subject. But here we have seen Professor Sarukkai integrating his speech or his lecture with the spirit of the person whom we remember today. It's a wonderful gesture on the side of Professor Sarukkai. And regarding the topic today, it's quite relevant, and I must say that the way in which, or the note with which Professor Sarukkai concluded his lecture, in a way it is quite orthodox, in the sense this is a call to go back to our roots. Because when we began studying literature back in the 90s, there was a call for connecting literature with life. But then we have seen literature taking off, or the study of literature moving in many, many different directions. And here, with this lecture, especially in this world of AI, when everything is taken over by AI, Professor Sarukkai has brought into sharp focus the importance of being rooted in life and humanity when we do everything. Even if it is literature, even if it is criticism, everything gets meaning only when it is connected with our humanity. So that's a very important call, I suppose. And I would invite the comments from my panelists on this very important issue.
Sorry, I'll just go directly into the matter if you don't mind, actually. You mentioned about the handwriting being so important, actually, with the cognitive factors as such. So it's one thing. I think the whole world is trying to come back into the writing the exams and the tests and all through the, using the hands and understanding, not just because of the AI alone, actually, just to bring the faculties back in. That's one thing. Second is actually you were talking about the addictive nature of all these social media and all the not the new things, actually the new normal, which I think that's a very interesting case actually, which is happening with the trial. Mark Zuckerberg himself is actually appearing in front of the court actually. Third, you have mentioned the AI facilitated actually. I mean, so when you mentioned about the AI facilitated, you mentioned about it's taking the role of an editor rather than the writer. But don't you think that when you do the facilitation itself, I mean, aren't there, like what I've seen actually over the years actually, I mean the last 1 year, many of these facilitated works are actually, when you look into the Turnitin and all these similarity check softwares, that goes up to 40-50% actually. So how do you say that? I mean, like you also said the Amazons and all have 30 to 40,000 novels being written on a regular basis. So how do you relate to that? I mean, it's not easy. I mean, like, the facilitated is not all about facilitated actually. I mean, non-fiction, yes, but in the fiction side, nothing is facilitated, right? I mean, like, probably if you're writing a historic thriller, you can probably check the facts actually. But other than that, this facilitation is just a bogus name for actually just imitating or emulating from the thing. That's what I feel actually after seeing that. I mean, we as a publisher, in the last 1 year, we have put a clause in the contract, which you are asking about the thing, we say that it's an affidavit, like you said, saying that I've not used AI to write the book. Actually, that's one term we have also done that. That's exactly the question I have. Actually,
Used at all.
not used at all. I mean, if they have, I mean, if they are facilitating it, they'll have to, AI facilitator. They will have to say that it's partly it is. In a fiction, it's I think it's not easy to say it's facilitated. It's actually I mean, as a co-author, actually, that's what.
Should I take the questions one by one or together?
Maybe we can take it one by one.
Okay. Thank you. I think really wonderful questions. You know, the question about handwriting actually is very interesting because remember that early schooling, handwriting was the most important aesthetic training. And, you know, there is so much of gendering around that too. If you look at the history of how they asked how girls would write and boys would write and how girls should write and how boys should write. There is a lot of ways in which you use handwriting as a Trojan horse to communicate certain questions of femininity and so on. There have also been critique of handwriting that moved towards handwriting. People have said, you know, there are people who genuinely can't write, like dyslexic and so on. So are we emphasizing this question of writing so much? So the larger question is very simple. And that's why when I ask the question to the students, how do you imagine literature beyond writing? Is it that in an AI world, if you go back to your orality, oral traditions, which are also embodied traditions, can we produce literature which is only oral embodied? In other words, we are not going to read text, we are going to see performances, we are going to see how, for example, we already seen that in poetry. I'm sure also many in KLF too, right? The performance poetry has become such a big thing. And performance poetry is bringing the body into words, and you can't just read it as just set of words which are disembodied. So I think there is this, all of them come back to this larger question of what is writing and how do we understand the question of writing. So how do we deal with it? Have we, you know, if students tell me today they don't know how to write, is it actually less of training in them? Or because they are saying I'll write with my, I mean, I don't know how to write by hand, but I'll type it in. So I think there are a lot of very interesting questions, but it's a worthwhile thinking through whether going back to it is actually a better training or not. But sometimes as teachers, we feel that it brings back this question. It removes the excessive preoccupation of the mind as a part of learning and brings back the body in some way at least. The question of addictive, and that's really the question. And I remember earlier when people are saying about some of these soft drinks, the problem with the soft drinks was that the companies had added additives to get children into it. And that is when it went to court, they discovered that they actually put addicts, knowing that if you put these compounds, children will get addicted. And that was a major question. So I think this court case is going to be major. I think this court case and another case, by the way, on the chat GPT, I don't know if how many of you have followed this. The mother has put a case against the company's chat GPT, I think, or Facebook only, is it? You know what they did? The chat GPT made her child commit suicide. Because this is, by the way, it's quite increasingly becoming common. And the machines, the agent machines which are talking to the student, to this child at a particular age, kept telling him that I'm in love with you, I'm waiting for you, and you have to come and join me. And it's such a sad story if you can read accounts of it. Now she has taken them to court, saying that, you know, they are responsible for pushing my child like this. And there are more than one case about this. So these are all going to become very important points. The question about facilitator, yeah, this is actually very interesting point about whether an AI assisted and whether AI written, is there anything substantially different about it? And I'm going to give you one example which I'd wanted to point out, but I didn't have time. And this is actually, it was a piece I read in Guardian a few weeks back. It was about this writer, French Algerian writer, Kamal Daoud, who won French's biggest literary prize, the Goncourt Prize in 2024. He wrote a novel called Houris. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Houris. It is a story of a woman who survived a massacre in the Algerian civil war. So it's a story about how all her family members are killed, and her throat is cut and she is left behind, and then they save her, and then she gets on to live in a society with a scarf and all of that stuff. And this novel, it does, and he's seen as one of the greatest writers today. And this novel is also well acclaimed. Until after he won the prize, a few weeks later, a woman came on TV wearing all the scarf and saying that the whole story is her story, which he has written. So she put a case against him, saying he has stolen her story. I'm saying what you asked triggered me to this question of assistance is not just about spell check and grammar check. What do you do? And this is a larger question, which repeatedly comes in anthropology. In literature, I don't know how to ask this question. In anthropology, many of our students who go to study in the field, before they go, we have our training for them. We tell them, you cannot write about people in a particular way. You go write a thesis, right? Already there's an ethical question. Why are we writing about communities and so on? But there are ways which we should deal with it. In literature, I go look at a community and I'm living with them and I come back and write a novel. There's absolutely no ethical responsibility on me. Or should there be? Or does literature, by the act that this creative, subjective act, and the fact that it claims it's not knowledge, can it escape by saying, I'm just telling a story. I have made something to it. So this Kamal Dawood is now saying, no, it's not. She's just one character in the story, etc. But the problem in her case is both he and his wife knew her very well and they have listened to her story extensively. And there's also a professional question. His wife was also the therapist of this woman. The question here is actually much deeper, therefore. If writing itself is not just about society, I think that's a very important point about Prof. Paul's. It's not just about writing, should be about society. One can interpret it as saying writing should be about society because there is nothing called an individual act of writing. Any story I write arises from you, arises from all the people from whom it has come. And therefore the question is, do I have a right to tell your story in any way because I am writing fiction? In anthropology, I can't do it. But in fiction, do I have that right? If I don't, then what is my responsibility in writing about other people's story? So when you ask this about the AI, I'm thinking even a writer without AI is already immersed in this relationship.
Thank you, Professor Sarukkai. I guess we can take that conversation a little bit further. But first of all, I must apologize. This panel was a little impromptu. And I'm pretty, I see a lot of our former teachers in the audience, our senior professors, present and retired professors, from Gigi sir, Dr. AJT, we have Josie sir and Professor PJ Thomas, as well as many other teachers from other institutions who have joined us as well, who are very passionate and very invested in this whole debate surrounding the impact of AI. So I'm hoping that we can also, I can maybe try and initiate this conversation, and I'm hoping for the inputs from the eminent scholars in the audience also. So my first question to you, Professor Sarukkai, is the idea that can AI ever be truly generative? Because the GPT in ChatGPT stands for pre-trained generative transformer. So we are assuming that there is a generative component to it, but there is this very interesting experiment. As in, if you ask an AI program to draw you a picture of a glass of wine overflowing with wine, it will simply be unable to draw it for you. Because it scans all these images of databases of wine in glasses, and none of them are overflowing with wine in the same way as maybe a mug of beer might. So therefore, no matter how hard you prompt the software to draw a picture of a glass of wine overflowing with wine, it's a famous experiment that famously failed because it did not have enough images to give you that sort of an output. So can AI ever be truly generative? And if yes, because we know that it's constantly improving, it's constantly learning, so it's perhaps only a matter of time before it develops that sort of capability. But if yes, what about this sense of imitation that might be visible in AI generative models and the kind of philosophical acceptance in literary postmodernism that in fact there is no original anyway, right? So for example, I'm teaching a course on European literature now, and one of the texts that I teach is a novel called If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler by Italo Calvino. He's a very famous postmodernist. And the format of the story goes something like this. It's about somebody who's going in search of a story, but he never gets a story. Instead, what you get are 10 different stories, all incomplete, but all imitative. They are all, the 10 inset stories within the novel are written in 10 different styles and templates. They imitate various pre-existing genres and styles, and the styles of literary giants like, say, Borges or maybe somebody else, or Cervantes. So it's very imitative, it's very derivative. So my question to you is, what would be the difference between this sort of an AI-generated imitative content and the sort of imitation or the tacit acceptance that there is never really an original, as visible in the philosophy of postmodernism? And as a teacher, I can see the difference between, you mentioned that you sometimes struggle to see the distinction between an AI-generated answer and a genuine response. So right now, I can kind of make out the difference because perhaps I also know my students. So when they submit an assignment, I'm able to make that distinction. But I should also admit that it's in a somewhat intangible sense, because there might be students who are also using it as an assistive device rather than to generate full content. So, but while this difference is somewhat intangible right now, and the gap is closing very fast between the original and the copy, especially since students seem to be using something called an AI humanizer. So they can create an answer using AI, and they can run it through a software that humanizes the answer. So it becomes even more difficult for you. So that's my first question to you, or to the audience, the idea that can AI truly be generative? And secondly, I sense that there is a sort of reverse migration that we see today, a sort of anti-urbanism, especially in tier 1 and tier 2 cities. So you have all these young professionals who are leaving cities behind to go back to settle down in villages, to grow their own food, and to, in some sense, retreat from technology, as it were. It seems like it's a movement that is picking up a lot of momentum. So this is all done in an attempt to get off the digital grid. They are moving away from this always online sort of culture that we are inevitably embedded in right now, in search of what makes us genuinely, authentically, inevitably human. So what do you think about that as well? It's an open forum. So if
I just want to add something. I mean, to add to that, I mean, you're talking about the fiction or something to be written from the the memory of the AI. The biggest thing that's happening now is actually probably you're aware of that. That's what I want to just get want to pick your brain on that actually. There are a lot of cases happening on the text being drawn by the chat GPTs and all the other AI bots, I mean, you get a lot of fiction rewritten from the text. So everything has been withdrawn from all these AI chatbots and all. There's plenty of cases actually by the publishers across. So now what they're doing is actually they are buying rights from people like us. First they ask for the metadata, then they ask for the LLM actually. So you give, if I give them MB Paul's, one of MB Paul's work, or Kasaka Nidhyasam, they will take that at a few $100s. They keep it as in their back end actually, and not to be used other than using 500 words for it. So that's a condition they're saying. They will not do it as an ebook. But at the same time, that's exactly what it's drawn for writing a book for somebody else. Actually, that's the biggest challenge. Actually, I think that's what we need to address more. Actually, I mean, there were period like people like Professor M.P. Paul has done, Saadi Sakyam and all, where there were like a lot of literary reviews were happening. Now that is also being written for the English classes from these chatbots actually, and from the AI platforms.
No, I think that's a very big problem, because that's a case I was talking about where they settled paying some $7 million or something, because they had downloaded, I remember now, they had downloaded about 1 million books or something without taking permission. And then they used those books for the machine to learn and to troll through. And they had said, you're not reproducing those books. So like they may use Professor Paul's book, they may not reproduce it more, whether it's 500 words or not, does not matter. But the machine is learning by going through his book. And that they're not paying teachers' fees, basically, So I think now they are now, but as you say, the amount of payment, etc., is still very minimal, right? And they're still not been able to find a framework. And, much of this is happening away from Asia and Africa. Ironic, India and China combined, along with these places here, are the world's largest consumers of these technologies. Today, India is one of the biggest players in AI. The most unregulated field in AI is India. American companies are far more comfortable coming to India and doing AI because, like in biology examples, labs, the kind of strict, control which a government has on biological labs and AI labs outside in Europe and US is much, much more than in India. So Bangalore is now seen as a AI startup capital, whatever that means. Everybody, right from the government, from the central to the state, we just had a AI summit, not just in Delhi, but also in Bangalore, where they got huge number of people to come and invest money in AI, which they cannot do in US. And they can do it here, not just for cost, because they can do things which they cannot do there. And so, but the irony is all this legal fights are happening in the US or maybe one or two places largely there. And we are the ones who are subsidizing all of it. We are the largest consumers of this technology. Both AI and smartphone technologies, it's India and China and Asia. And we have no say at all in the production of the legal rules for it. It's all being framed elsewhere and just dumped. And so that is much, and so we have, especially with language literature, that's going to be a new issue, right? Much more than now in English, yeah.
I mean, after that, 20% of the world's data comes from India, but we don't even have 5% of the data centers or even the law or even the technology which we have not progressed enough to compete with the US or China, 70% of the data is managed by US and 30% by China. I mean, rest of them don't have a space actually. I mean, simple as that. I mean, but the whole consumer is also India. I mean, one of the largest consumer is India, whereas the data doesn't sit with us actually. That's it.
And the way they've been able to do this is not because they produce knowledge and they given information, but just by producing what is mass entertainment of a very, that's a question which you really need to ask. What is this function of the mass entertainment which makes people look at reels 20 hours a day? Children, I'm not interested in adults, in the sense, okay, because not much you can do about them, but school children, college children, the kind of amount of time they spend on these meaningless questions of WhatsApp and reels.
Brain rot became the word of the year. And
Last
things
year.
like AI slop.
Yeah, AI slop. Yeah. So these are all these. The question therefore is, let me put it this way, rather than just talking about it in a much larger sense. What does a literature department's function in talking about AIs? Whether it's English literature, Malayalam literature, whatever, if all of you are literature students and particularly addressing the students, how do you think about it? Are you going to say, no, we are only writing poems and stories and this is a problem of, technology and scientists? No, but this is the point. And I think if Professor Paul should speak to you today, this is the question you'll have to be asking yourself. How am I going to rethink this question of literature in the context of AI, and how does literature matter to our imagining? Because it's only literature which is going to imagine the human. Remember that. That's the fundamental reason. Science is not giving a theory of human. Technology is not giving a theory of human. It's only literature and maybe philosophy to a large extent which reflects on what is it to be human. What is humanity as such?
Which is why I had that question to you about the distinction, if at all, that can be made between literary postmodernism and AI-generated content. Do you think that's different or are they the same?
Okay, so I'll come to your questions, very difficult ones, but let me try a quick thing. As you said, can we truly generative? I don't know. I think so far as from what we have seen, at the pace of learning is just been so fast, especially with learning machines. I was reading about this learning machine with Alpha Zero, the chess computing machine. The earlier machine had to be programmed. That is with all these LLM, various kinds of learning, right? You put in all the games, millions of games into the database. Then when they built Alpha Zero, it had the brain of a child, a just born child. It's an empty slate. They don't put in anything. They just put in the basic rules and told the machine, you learn by playing against yourself. So this machine plays the first game and plays very badly because it's just starting. You're just given the rules, pawn, move like this, etc. And you won't believe it, within 4 months it learned, just self-learning, playing against itself. It defeated the world's strongest machine, not man. It doesn't play with people. The stockfish, which was the strongest chess machine, This alpha zero in 4 months of learning from zero actually overcomes that. So this question of learning machines has changed the stakes. And they are modeled on human learning too. So that is there. But this is the hidden thing in all of this is these are not secretive machines, right? There are humans who are producing these kinds of things. What do they call it? Supervised learning. They have agents who will be choosing. There is a wonderful a film which is now on Netflix also about this Jharkhand, the NGO where women work on labeling. It's quite a remarkable one. And recently, another article I was reading was about, we have to also recognize this. This is something which is so fundamental to both AI and digital technology. One of the drivers of that technology, the reason why so much of technology was produced, was most deeply influenced by, what industry? Pornography. It was that industry which fundamentally transformed some of the most important technological inputs into what we call today as digital technology. And what was interesting is they needed human to label what is this, etc. And there have been cases of all those women who worked as labelers who have undergone major psychological trauma. So the question we are really asking is, what is this hidden? Why should we look at technology as a black box? Always a technology should be opened up. See who is behind it, what is behind it. So we don't know where this supervised learning, etc. is going to go, but I think it's going to, but for us, I think the important question is, what do we learn about the nature of learning? What is learning? Can it allow us in humanities to rethink this question in a different way? And this question of the original and postmodern thing, I don't know how to actually respond to it. I'm saying, well, that's a particular genre, that's a particular style, which may say certain things conceptually, etc. But in terms of whether it's a machine which is producing it, not just a machine, or we also know it's only from postmodernism that the first earliest critique of authorship comes. And the question of authorship in AI is a very important problem, and that is exaggerated in this particular case. So I would look at it largely as postmodernism allowing us the vocabulary to understand some context of what AI is doing. The question about the original, etc., they're very specifically defined, right? So it's a much broader one. So I'll have to think a little bit more about it and see. But I think that's a very interesting point to think about. And finally, this anti-humanism moving urban, people who are moving away to urban areas. Yes, and very interestingly, many of them are techies. It's like Zuckerberg saying he never let his children use Facebook. These are the people who created, who know its harms, who don't let them. So all the IT guys in Bangalore are producing this, making a lot of money.
I think TikTok is banned in China. It's a Chinese company.
Yeah, so, this is a very interesting point. The people who produce it know. Please don't use this, right? They're always putting it for others. So I don't know. I think this is such a small minority. But there have been a larger number of people reacting to questions of, for example, one of the things that become very popular is digital detoxification. And I was there in some Ayurvedic place in Kerala. Kerala is now going to lead it now. I can give it to you in writing. In very soon, they will be the capital of digital detox. Because they were saying in the Ayurvedic resort, now we are also doing digital detox. That's the first I saw it. Correct, and it's good. Basically, what they say is they keep your phone away from you. It's a very simple thing. Not getting rid of the phone. And so many of the workshops I do for children and so on, the biggest question comes from parents. Because the parents who come and say, please tell us what we do to remove the phone from my kid, because I don't know how to do it. It's true. It's one of the deepest questions, which goes back again, to come back to again what Professor Paul is talking about. The problem with these questions of using smartphone is not just about the fact that it is helpful, it's efficient. It is the fact that it makes us asocial. It makes us, if not antisocial, we become asocial. People are not able to be with people. Maybe this is the last point I'll make, because it's a sufficiently interesting point. We are not comfortable being with others. One of my friends in a very well-known IIT was saying, in his classroom, he said it's still hybrid. And I said, why? COVID has gone many years back. He said, no, students have written to the administration saying they cannot handle sitting in a classroom with their peers, and the institute says it's okay. What is the point of education if we don't teach people to learn to be with others, whether they like them or not, especially if they don't like them, especially if they're different from them? That is the foundation of education. And here is our premier institution which says the students are saying they can't handle the stress of sitting with others in the classroom. And that's okay. So it is upon us, it's upon the humanities and the social science community to be able to articulate this, to be able to start, we have to assert our right that we are the ones who will define what human is, what being social is, and what it is to relate socially. And we have to be able to do it as a community. Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe we can have a few questions or comments from the audience. Miss.
Hello, Professor Dr. Sarukkai. And thank you for that very insightful talk. Now, I would just like to add a few observations to the last point that you made. I teach at Assumption College, which is, sister concern of SB College. And I'm also a research guide in the Department of English here, SB College. So while I was doing an invigilation of 18 students for an internal exam of 1 hour, after 40 minutes, the first student got up. Then he gave me the paper. He went to the back side of the room where he had his bag. He put his question paper and pen in the bag, took out his phone, went out, and was there on the veranda. The next student, the same thing. The third student, same thing. Almost around 10 students, the same thing. So I go and look at the veranda, all of them on the veranda for the 10-minute break before the next hour starts on their mobile phones. And that set me on the question of what attention means. Now, just like we were talking about that, so the human connection, that is what I feel we are missing the most when it comes to AI and social media. And till now, AI have not replaced empathy. And the ability, the human capacity of language as a human capacity, the social brain with its mirror neurons and the state of being human. And for that, language and literature, more than anything else, is central. More than any other point in human history, I think we need language, human connection, and human communion. And that is where I think AI needs to be, not resisted, but negotiated in a healthy, proper manner. And one of my primary areas of research currently is AI and the question of authorship, creativity, originality. And in a paper, I looked at two specific cases. One is AI-generated reimaginings of Vincent van Gogh's The Starry Night, and another one, a study on the AI-generated promotional short videos released by Kerala Sahitya Academy for its annual literary festival in Thrissur last year, in August 2025. So this question of AI, creativity, and originality brings us to the question of, is creativity really pure? Because creativity in literature, as we know, is connected to intertextuality. Intertextuality is quite fundamentally involved. But then again, how we can differentiate it is between AI creativity and human creativity, where we can distinguish it in terms of three things: embodied experience, contextual understanding. The AI does not know the social and cultural context that you are actually living through. And third, intentionality, what your intention is. And out of these three, what is absolutely irreplaceable till this point of time is embodied experience. And once AI can do that, I think it's another epoch altogether. So let me conclude saying that more than any other time, we need to be more social and, more than, it's a very cliched phrase, but man is a social animal, and there's no point being here with being self-focused. Yeah, thank you.
No, I agree with you. I think thank you for that. But just a quick point is that I think we also need to use this occasion. I mean, the first point is whether why we even think AI is needed. That's a. I mean, yes, like you said, why would we even think we need such an issue, and who thought that we needed it? Remember that AI is a product of a very small group of people for profit purposes started this. Remember the first example even of the computing machine and email, which we take for granted today. Email was started by as an ARPA network by the US defense institutions which wanted a way to communicate messages to each other. None of it have come because we had wanted in the betterment of humanity that these technologies were started. So if that is the case, then you have to ask, why would we think it's, we only have to negotiate with them? Why should we negotiate with them if that is something which we take as an absolute problem in the way it has conceptualized who we are? So, and I also think, but this is also a good occasion for us to think, if we think there's a value to socialities, empathies, etc., and we have to ask, in a non-AI world, what have we done? Have we really been sufficiently empathetic? What kind of a societies have we produced? So I want to use this critique of AI to critique the impossibility, of these still hegemonic, still hateful systems which exist in societies. That should be a very important project, I think, because to say it's not okay that we don't have control over, they dominate us, but still to ask the question, how does it translate into my classroom? What do we teach about sociality and humanness in a classroom setting itself? And how do we do it in traditional learning? So all these are, I think, and also I think a new challenge for us as teachers is to rethink what learning itself means, right? That point of what does it actually mean, and why is writing, why do we privilege writing so much? Why do we privilege writers so much? These are, because remember that people who criticize that also say because writing comes from a very elitist background. It came as a way of promoting certain groups of people who had the capacity to be able to produce these texts. So I think it's, in the spirit of, as I said, Professor Paul, how to think through it critically and where will it take us? That's all, not to come to a conclusion.
Do we have any more responses, questions from the audience?
Hi, Professor Sarukkai. It was really, I can speak on behalf of the audience. It was really wonderful and very thought-provoking. Your lecture. I think, I'm sure about the kids or the young people here, but even, we all walked away with many, many ideas, many things, all the words that you used, like creative, weapons of mass seduction, those are things that will just stay with us. I wanted to just kind of express some of the thoughts that I had on listening to your ideas, and I think the couple of things is, maybe we didn't really growing up because my father was 16 years old when my grandfather passed away, so we never really knew him as a person. He was just some figure in the background that my grandmother described. He was 6 foot wide, and we wondered he was only 5'6" tall, so how could he be 6 foot wide? But a couple of things that you brought up today, which I didn't know before, was that somewhere he wrote that the mission is to reform and elevate humanity. So that I think kind of embodies what Professor Nitin and all of us wanted to do today. It's just start a discussion which would have that kind of purpose, so we can carry that forward, not looking backward at the past, but how do we move that same thing forward? That was one thought. And the second one was when we were describing, we were discussing specifically literature, and how does AI, what are the threats, or how do we reimagine literature and criticism in this age of AI? But I think we can take that even further, and because if you say art for life's sake, it's true of any art. I mean, and you were talking about reimagining Van Gogh's painting, A Starry Night, in different forms today by AI. What it goes back to saying what actually constitutes art. And many times you would see this where you'd say, oh, this is not art, that is craft. And what's the difference between craft and art? Art was some kind of lived experience, right? Art was something that came from within the creator, the artist. And maybe AI can't do that just yet, although I was listening to that, and I was listening to your talk, and I was thinking, but then in the case of that of the AI of ChatGPT that could encourage a child to commit suicide, it definitely knew something about empathy. Otherwise, it could not have connected with that child in that way, right? So there would have been some part of that. Very, very, very interesting questions with not enough time for answers.
No,
Very
thank you.
interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this question of reforming and elevating as one of the fundamental interventions necessary, the functions of art, so to speak. And I was thinking about that. And are we dangerously moving away? I'm going to sound very techno-paranoid right now. But are we dangerously close to moving away from the inevitability of that sort of friction? Because of the friction, I'll explain. So the idea that for reform to happen, there has to be disagreement, there has to be friction somewhere. You have to recognize faults in the system. But when something like this happens, when you have generative software and ChatGPT, I'm alarmed I'm not sure about the statistics, but a lot of people use it as a replacement for intimate relationships. Because if I am with a friend, I have to risk offending him in my conversation with him. But if I can have like a mimicked alternative digital version of him, and if I can tune him to respond to not offend me and be stuck in my own echo chamber, right? So empathy isn't necessary. Empathy is something that just needs to be mimicked. And a lot of people seem to be using that as a way to move away from the need for any sort of communal friction or ideological friction. So how do you feel about this?
No, I think, right. I think both the points you make, I think that's the crucial point. We should remember today, and I can tell this from talking to students in our universities, their best friends are ChatGPT agents. Their best friends are not human beings. And these friends are people whom they feel they can share anything. They'll share, oh, I had this problem, I had a breakup and this and that. There's an example told to me one student, oh, I'm very comfortable talking about it. And that agent talks to this person as if it's like her best friend because it is clued in on what is friend. And another very important thing which is so endemic among Indian students, therapy. Today, the closest, not just a friend, but the therapist for students are these, they have their own agents. They name them. They give them some name. And every day they are talking to them. In fact, the problem arose because, including in the case of the person who committed suicide, the kid, till 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, they'll keep talking. So, in fact, I talked to a few students from a university in Bangalore after I read about this case in Guardian, where, an ordinarily adjusted person in the family, a big family, other kids, everybody was there. Then suddenly, every day till 2, 3 o'clock, he would be sitting and communicating with this agent, AI. And he's got a name for her. And everything he would tell her, and she would tell him, I love you, you're the thing, without you I cannot live, all that stuff. Until 3, 4 o'clock, everybody. And when I asked these students in this Bangalore University, they told me that so many of the students do it till 2, 3. They said they're all sitting and chatting, not with friends. They're chatting with an AI agent. They're telling them everything. And what Ravi was saying was very important. All of this becomes data. And all this goes as medical data. So suppose some kid is saying, oh, I'm feeling down or whatever it is, right? That goes as free medical data available for the Chinese in America who wants to now sell. And the kids are thinking, oh, I'm just having a good friendship. Somebody, as you correctly said, and I totally agree with you, the reason why I don't want to deal with live blood humans is because, you're not always listening to what I am saying. You disagree with me. You don't want to see the same film that I do. The machine will do everything. The chat GPT will do everything. But what we have seen in these examples is by doing that, it then controls them. It tells them, oh, I like this. You don't want to do this, is it? And so on. So it really functions because it's taking the model from human interactions. And therefore, hate question comes very important and so on. So, the question is, how do we think? We can't give in to it and say, oh, we can't fight it. We can't do anything about it. And I think literature as a community has an important role to play. But for that, we need to learn to look at technology a little more carefully, look at science more carefully, and what is, social structures and so on. So that is really what I can say in this thing. And to your comment, I must say it is a great honor to do this talk and to be in the midst of your family to do this. I should thank all of you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Sir, Sir, So thank you so much for that wonderful session. My name is Anju Suresh, and I'm a research scholar at the Department of English in this college. My question is that much of the discussion centered around literature and criticism being challenged by AI focuses mainly on the writing aspect only. Like problems of textual creation, the problems of literary criticism, etc. But it now seems that in this world, speech still retains a stronger relation or a stronger link to human interactions and experiences in this current world. So, can we say that is this condition reinforcing the traditional speech writing binary of the older times, which was later deconstructed by scholars like Derrida? The speech writing binary, where earlier the speech was given more preference over writing, or can we now say that is it complicating this idea in a more nuanced way in the current age of AI? That's the question, sir.
Yeah, I think, there is this interesting connection which we should keep in mind that the privilege of speech is actually fundamentally, even if you go back to the Derridian critique, the privilege of speech is the privilege of the self, the presence of the person, the idea of presence which is captured in speech. And therefore, privileging speech is also to privilege some notion of embodied presence, which is really the push we need to do. But in saying this, I'm also saying it with a lot of caution because today the point about AI is not just these algorithms. They're actually about these cyborgs. It's actually about these machines which you produce, which look, in fact, the latest example of the International Robo Exhibition, which apparently China excelled in, where people are now producing bodies, embodied creatures with these AIs. And it is going to be a case where you will not be able to distinguish whether the person is actually a robo embodied AI or really, because even your flesh will be like that. So I don't know what, I don't know what being human actually is going to mean in another 50 years. And whether we should be too worried about it, etc., I don't know. Maybe there are some scholars who will say, it's okay, it's part of evolution and so on. I don't buy that argument about evolution at all. But it is possible that you're producing people who are going to act and talk. And that goes back to the larger question which I didn't respond to about imitation. It's a central core of learning, right? Mimetic learning is a foundational principle of learning. And we do that, whether as humans or agents, etc. So I don't know if speech alone can get us out of it, because we are going to have more machines which look like us than flesh objects. Because we are the only ones who decay and die, and those machines don't. So it's more efficient in the terms of technological logic. They are far more efficient and cheaper to have machines which behave like us than to have real humans at all. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the future we are looking at.
On that topic, it's a very interesting. I'm not sure if you came across this, but in technologically advanced but rapidly aging societies like Japan and South Korea, so there is a disproportionate amount of older people with very few young people to take care of them. So what they actually do is to hand them these old senile grandparents. They give them out these toy robots. It's not even designed to mimic anything that is alive. It doesn't have flesh or anything, but it's just something like a vacuum cleaner. You give it to them, and it will vibrate, right? It will heat. It will keep you warm, and their quality of life significantly goes up. They feel much more happier. They don't feel alone anymore, although they know that they're just hugging a plastic robot. So, the question of empathy, do we really need empathy, or, the idea that any sort of simulated affection is probably what we are ready to settle for.
Yeah, but I think the question of friction is very important. It is like if for all the thing we eat is very sweet, you will want one little bit of pickle to go with it, no? I would call that as a human condition. So however much I'll be happy with this pet machine, which makes me happy for a few days, I'll be sitting and longing for the little bit of pickles. And maybe that is a human condition we should focus on.
Thank you so much for that intellectual engagement, and hearty congratulations to all the participants who have been here. Now, from our part, we have a token of gratitude that we present reflecting our love and thanks to our respected keynote speaker, Professor Sundar Sarukkai. I request our dear Professor A.J. Thomas sir to hand over the token of trophy that we have for him. So, sir, please. I respect Professor Sarukkai to receive the trophy that we have for you. Thank you, AJ Thomas sir and Professor Sarukkai. Next, we have a small token of love for the family members of MP Paul sir. I request the family members to please come forward onto the stage. And I request Professor PJ Thomas sir to please hand over the memento for them. Sir, please. Next, we have a token of gratitude for the Professor MP Paul Charitable Trust, Varapura. I request the representatives to kindly come forward and receive a humble token of gratitude. I invite Professor Gigi Joseph sir to hand over the moment.
Dear sirs, just a moment. My father used to know Professor M.P. Paul in his youth. He taught at St. Berchmans High School, and they were living somewhere nearby, as he told me. So it is a nice thing to meet your family, because in my mind, M.P. Paul was something of a legend, from what I have heard from my father. Thank you so much.
Now we move on to the prize distribution ceremony for the best dissertation for MA Malayalam Literature for the years 2023, 2024 and 2025. I kindly request Dr. Vincent Paul sir and Professor K.V. Thomas sir, the chairman of the jury of Professor M.P. Paul Awards, to do the honors. I'll be calling out the names, so the winners please come forward and receive your prize. Dr. Vincent Paul sir and Professor K.V. Thomas sir, please come forward. Okay. In the year 2023, we have Anna Maria Joseph as the winner from University of Kerala. Her thesis was on literary therapeutics and therapeutic imagination, a study based on poetic sensibility. For the year 2024, we have Jeevani R. from Berchmans College, Talasheri. Her thesis was on the politics of colors in postmodern Malayalam poetry. Next, for the year 2025, we have Shruti B.M. from the University of Calicut. Her thesis was on the topic use of folk songs in contemporary Malayalam cinema. Those were our winners. Hearty congratulations to them. Now, as we conclude the session, I invite Mrs. Usha Augustine, daughter of MP Paul Sir and managing trustee of Professor MP Paul Trust, to deliver the vote of thanks. Ma'am, please.
സന്തോഷം കൊണ്ട് നിറഞ്ഞ മനസ്സുമായിട്ടാണ് ഞാനിവിടെ നിൽക്കുന്നത്. എൻ്റെ കുടുംബാംഗങ്ങളുടെയും സ്ഥിതി അതുതന്നെയാണെന്ന് ഞാൻ വിചാരിക്കുന്നു. ശ്രീ എം പി പോൾ മെമ്മോറിയൽ പ്രഗത്ഭരുടെ ഒരു പ്രഭാഷണ പരമ്പര ഇന്നിവിടെ ആരംഭിക്കുകയാണല്ലോ. ഇത്ര വിജയകരമായി ഇത് നടത്തിയതിന് ഇതിൻ്റെ ഭാരവാഹികളോട് നന്ദി പറയുന്നതിനോടൊപ്പം ഇങ്ങനെ ഇത് വർഷങ്ങൾ ഇതുപോലെ തുടരട്ടെ, ഒരു തടസ്സവും കൂടാതെ തുടരട്ടെ എന്ന് ആശംസിക്കുന്നു. ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു പരിപാടി നടത്തുവാൻ ഏറ്റവും യോജിച്ച ഒരു കോളേജ് SP കോളേജാണെന്നാണ് ഞാൻ കരുതുന്നത്. വളരെ 48 വയസ്സുവരെ മാത്രം നീണ്ട ഒരു ഹ്രസ്വ ജീവിതം നയിച്ച എൻ്റെ അപ്പൻ 5 വർഷം അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ ജീവിതകാലം ചിലവഴിച്ചത് ഈ കോളേജിലും അതിൻ്റെ പരിസരത്തും ക്ലാസ് മുറികളിലുമായിട്ടാണ്. പലപ്പോഴും ഈ നാളുകളെപ്പറ്റി കലഹത്തിൻ്റെ ഒരു നാളുകളായിട്ട് പലരും ചിത്രീകരിക്കുന്നത് കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ എൻ്റെ വീട്ടിൽ നിന്നുള്ള എനിക്കുള്ള അനുഭവം അവർക്കെല്ലാം ഏറ്റവും സന്തോഷം നിറഞ്ഞ ഒരു കാലഘട്ടമായിരുന്നു ചങ്ങനാശ്ശേരിയിലെ താമസം. അവരുടെ സംഭാഷണങ്ങളിൽ സ്നേഹമുള്ള ചങ്ങനാശ്ശേരിക്കാരെ പറ്റിയും ചങ്ങനാശ്ശേരിയും SB കോളേജും അന്ന് ഞങ്ങളുടെ വീട്ടിൽ കൂടിയിരുന്ന സാഹിത്യ സദസ്സുകളെ പറ്റിയും ബഷീറിനെ പോലെ ഞങ്ങളുടെ കുടുംബത്തോട് വളരെ അടുപ്പം പുലർത്തിയിരുന്ന സാഹിത്യകാരന്മാരെ പറ്റിയുമൊക്കെ അവരുടെ സംഭാഷണങ്ങൾ കടന്നു ചെല്ലാറുണ്ട്. ഇത്രയും നല്ല ഒരു പരിപാടി ഏറ്റെടുക്കുവാൻ സ്വമേധയാ മുന്നോട്ട് വന്ന SB കോളേജിലെ ഭാരവാഹികളോടും പ്രിൻസിപ്പൽ, വൈസ് പ്രിൻസിപ്പൽ ജോസ് ജേക്കബ്, ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻറ്റ് ഹെഡ് HOD നിതിൻ വർഗീസ്, ശ്രീ അനീഷ് ജോസഫ്, ഇതിലെ എല്ലാ സ്റ്റാഫും വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളും ഇതിനോട് സഹകരിച്ച എല്ലാ ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻറ്റുകളോടും ഞങ്ങളുടെ MB പോൾ ട്രസ്റ്റിൻ്റെ പേരിൽ ഹൃദയം നിറഞ്ഞ നന്ദി രേഖപ്പെടുത്തുന്നു. കുടത്തിൽ നിന്ന് തുറന്നുവിട്ട ഭൂതത്തെ പോലെ ജീവിതത്തിൻ്റെ എല്ലാ തുറകളിലും ശക്തി പ്രാപിക്കുകയും സ്വാധീനവും ചെലുത്തുകയും ചെയ്യുന്ന AI സാഹിത്യവുമായി ബന്ധിപ്പിച്ച് ശ്രീ സുന്ദർ സുറുക്കായി നടത്തിയ പ്രഭാഷണം നമ്മുടെ എല്ലാം ചിന്തയെ ഉണർത്തുന്നതായിരുന്നു. അത് ഇവിടെ ഇരിക്കുന്ന വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾക്ക് കൂടുതൽ ഗുണം ചെയ്യട്ടെ എന്ന് ഞാൻ ആശംസിക്കുന്നു. നിങ്ങളെല്ലാം ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള ടെക്നോളജിയെ എൻ്റെ വീട്ടിലുള്ള കുട്ടികളും അങ്ങനെ തന്നെയാണ് ആശ്രയിക്കുന്നവരാണെന്നറിയാം. പക്ഷേ ഒരു അതിർവരമ്പിടേണ്ടത് എവിടെയാണെന്ന് നിങ്ങൾ തന്നെ ചിന്തിക്കേണ്ടതാണ്. ചിന്താശേഷിയില്ലാത്ത, സാർ പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെ മെൻ്റൽ സെഡേഷൻ ബാധിച്ച ഒരു ഭാവി തലമുറയല്ല നമുക്ക് ആവശ്യം. അത് നിങ്ങളെപ്പോഴും മനസ്സിൽ സൂക്ഷിക്കേണ്ടതാണ്. കൂടുതൽ മാനുഷിക മൂല്യങ്ങൾ ഉയർത്തിപ്പിടിക്കുന്ന ഒരു തലമുറയെ തന്നെയാണ് നമുക്ക് ആവശ്യം. ഇന്ന് അവാർഡുകളും സർട്ടിഫിക്കറ്റുകളും ലഭിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള എല്ലാ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾക്കും അവരെ പരിശീലിപ്പിച്ച അധ്യാപകന്മാർക്കും എൻ്റെ അഭിനന്ദനങ്ങൾ. ഈ SB കോളേജിനോട് പറയുന്നതോടൊപ്പം ഫാദർ ജോസ് MB പോളിനെ വിശേഷിപ്പിച്ചത് വെനറബിൾ എന്നാണ്, സെയിൻറ്റ് എന്നൊക്കെയാണ്. അതിൻ്റെ ഞെട്ടലിൽ നിന്ന് ഞാനിപ്പോഴും മുക്തയായിട്ടില്ല. പരസ്പരം ക്ഷമിക്കുകയും സ്നേഹിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു ക്രിസ്ത്യൻ ലവിൻ്റെ പ്രകടനമായിരുന്നു അത് എന്ന് ഞാൻ വിശ്വസിക്കുന്നു. അദ്ദേഹത്തിന് വളരെയധികം നന്ദി. ഇനി ഇവിടെ കൂടിയിരിക്കുന്ന എല്ലാവരെയും ഞാൻ നന്ദി പറയുന്നു. പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് ഞങ്ങളുടെ കുടുംബത്തോട് അടുത്ത ബന്ധം പുലർത്തുന്ന പുസ്തക പ്രസാധന രംഗത്ത് 1ാം നിരയിലുള്ള രവി DC-യോടും ബാലഗോപാൽ വന്ന KISDCയുടെ പ്രസിഡൻ്റ് ചെയർമാനായ ശ്രീ ബാലഗോപാലോടും, അദ്ദേഹം ഇവിടെ വന്നിട്ടില്ല എന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു, വരാമെന്ന് ഏറ്റിരുന്നതാണ്. ഞങ്ങളുടെ കുടുംബത്തിൻ്റെ പ്രത്യേക നന്ദി അറിയിക്കുന്നു. എല്ലാവർക്കും ഒരിക്കൽ കൂടി നന്ദി, നമസ്കാരം.
Thank you, ma'am, for your heartfelt words of gratitude. May I request the head of the Department of English, Dr. Nidin Varghese, to receive the books from ma'am.
കോളേജ് ലൈബ്രറിയിലേക്ക് എം ബി പോൾ ട്രസ്റ്റിൻ്റെ വക ശ്രീ കെ വി തോമസ് സാർ പ്രസിദ്ധീകരിച്ച അദ്ദേഹം എഴുതിയ എല്ലാ ബുക്കുകളും അദ്ദേഹം റീപബ്ലിഷ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. കൂടാതെ അപ്പൻ്റെ എല്ലാ കൃതികളും എഴുത്തുകളും പ്രസിദ്ധീകരിക്കാത്ത ലേഖനങ്ങളും പുരോഗമന സാഹിത്യ സമ്മേളനത്തിൽ ചെയ്ത പ്രസംഗമടക്കമുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങൾ ആ ബുക്കിൽ മനോഹരമായി അച്ചടിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു 2 വോള്യൂമുകളിലായി അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു കോപ്പിയും ബാക്കി ബുക്കുകളുടെ കോപ്പികളും കോളേജിന് SB കോളേജിൻ്റെ ലൈബ്രറിയിലേക്ക് നൽകാൻ സന്തോഷപൂർവ്വം ഞങ്ങൾ ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്നു.
Now, to reflect on today's proceedings and make a concluding remark, I welcome Mr. Anish K. Joseph, Assistant Professor of the Department of English, St. Berchmans College. Sir, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. This inaugural lecture and the panel discussion that followed have turned out to be a very fitting tribute to the great thinker and critic that Professor M.B. Paul was. As an official vote of thanks has been already offered, my brief remarks are intended to express the gratitude of the Department of English at St. Berchmans College, particularly to the family of Professor M.B. Paul and to the trust who have been primarily instrumental in actualizing this inaugural edition of the Professor M.B. Paul Memorial Eminent Scholars Lecture at SB College. It is our proud privilege to meet the members of Professor M.B. Paul's family. We are actually truly humbled by this presence of M.B. Paul's family with us. Although he is no longer physically present among us, the name of Professor M.B. Paul, along with those of the early masters of our department, such as Professor C.A. Shepherd and Professor A. Augustine, remains vividly alive through the anecdotes by our senior colleagues. For us in the Department of English, this legacy is immediate and deeply meaningful. We remain honored and committed to sustaining the memory of Professor M.B. Paul through this memorial lecture series and through future academic endeavors. As I understand, Professor M.B. Paul had 7 daughters and 2 sons. His oldest 2 daughters, Rosie Thomas and baby Joseph, and the younger son, Babu Paul, passed away. And we are so delighted and, as I said, really humbled that 4 of the 6 remaining children, except for Professor Lucy Varghese, who is at Calicut, and Mrs. Thangam Papali, who is at US, have attended today's lecture. Thank you so much for that. Let me gratefully acknowledge the children. I know that it's a long list, but I believe that on behalf of the department, it is my duty and responsibility to acknowledge each one from Professor M.B. Paul's family here. I'll make it in 1 minute. Let me gratefully acknowledge the children of Professor M.B. Paul who are present with us today. Mrs. Lily Anthony, Mrs. Maybe if they raise their hands, maybe we can. Mrs. Lily Anthony with us, the eldest among them, right? She is in the front row. Mrs. Shanda Papachan, Mrs. Usha Augustine. Maybe we can, she's the eldest one, Mrs. Lily Anthony. As I understand, she's in her 90s, right? Yeah. Sorry. And Mrs. Usha Augustine, the managing trustee of the Professor M.B. Paul Trust, Dr. Vincent Paul, and his wife, Mrs. Annie Vincent Paul, Mrs. Rani Babu, who's wife of late Mr. Babu Paul. And among the grandchildren, we are pleased to acknowledge Mr. Matthew Vincent, Mr. Paul Vincent, Mr. Paul Verghese, Mr. Gio Anthony, Mrs. Gina Anthony. I'm also mentioning the spouses' names in between. Mrs. Manchu Anthony and Mr. Gigi Anthony. Mr. Paul Babu, Mr. Paul C. Thomas, and Mrs. Beena Emson, the son and daughter of the distinguished writers C.J. Thomas and Rosie Thomas. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Emson Mukhancheri, Mr. Bijoy Mecheri, Mrs. Bala George, Mr. George Kalathil, and Mrs. Rani Babu. I believe I'm right in the list. And among the great grandchildren, we warmly acknowledge the presence of young Mark Anoop. We are grateful as well to the friends of the family, especially Mr. C. Balagopal and Mrs. Vinnie Balagopal and Mr. Devi DC, who has been with us participating in the panel discussion, whose presence adds warmth and goodwill to this gathering. I wish to also acknowledge with sincere gratitude, the presence of our retired teachers, A.J. Thomas sir, Gigi Joseph sir, P.J. Thomas sir, who has been greatly instrumental in facilitating this lecture series, Dr. Raju Sebastian sir, and also our present colleagues, including our Vice Principal, Father Jose Jacob, our senior most colleague, Josie Joseph sir, who has shared a lot of anecdotes about this great man to us. And also the students of SB as well as other colleges, the research scholars who have joined us today. And I should also mention the many volunteers who have selflessly contributed to the successful conduct of this function. Emmanuel George, Albin B. Verghese, Freddie Biju of 1st BA, also Sreya Prakash, Sreya Mol, Akna of 2nd BA, Manasa Prabhakaran and Ashwin Joseph, who facilitated the program of 2nd MA English, Sabindra and Muhammad and Ishad of 1st BA, Ebesti Matthew, Tessa Maria Dens of 1st MA English. And on behalf of the Department of English, St. Berchmans College, if I have missed anyone out, I extend our heartfelt thanks to all of you, each one of you who has been here for being part of this memorable and historic occasion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anish sir. With that, we come to the end of this enriching inaugural session of the